Thank you for coming. A colleague of mine, John Storyk, has designed. Anything I say is going to take away from the lecture, so I'll let his music do the talking.
But I just, before John starts, thank you for coming, John. But also, I'd just like to say that also thank Sandro for all the effort he's put into organising this. I would also say that the event is sponsored by Sandro's non-profit organisation, Crosstown Arts.
All right.
So thanks again.
Who made the poster?
The designer's not here yet. The graphic design students, hopefully, should be arriving.
That's a first. That all of a sudden,
I'll have them stand up.
all these posters arrived, which was a little shocking. So I sent it to everyone in our company to see, like a vote, and it was almost unanimous. The kid that did that one poster was pretty. Want to meet him? Maybe he needs a job, right?
In about a couple months, yes.
Yeah, everybody needs a job, right?
Oh, I made the poster.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right, well, thanks. Okay, thanks for. So, well, there's the dead giveaway about what we're going to talk about. So, if you're interested in architecture, design, kind of have a little bit of an interest in acoustics, and maybe a little bit more than a little interest in recording studios, you're in the right room for a few hours. If all that stuff is not what you're interested in, you should have been in the biology class before, because that's what we're going to do. I see if I can get you to fall in love with this subject. I've given this talk a few times. I tried to modify it a little bit for this school, knowing that most people in this room are probably not acousticians or audio engineers. A little later on in the afternoon, I'll be at Berkeley, where I teach this course, recording studio design. That's me, that's my company. The Walters is my wife. We're partners for 30 years. I'm doing this almost 50 years, which just means I'm old. And you'll soon see why I'm paying homage to Jimmy and Electric Lady Studios, which was his recording studio, and still is one of New York's premier recording studios all these years later. So let's dive in. This is architecture and acoustics, and specifically recording studio design. It's a subject I'm passionate about. It's pretty much been doing it all my life. So let's start. This is the challenge. This is what I try to do every day in our company. We have about 60 to 70 people in 5 offices throughout the world. Pretty much, this is all that we do, recording studios and architecture that involves advanced acoustics, also AV technology, et cetera, et cetera. And for us, I don't see a difference between architecture, design, and acoustics. Most people view acoustics as something you paint on later. Okay, oh yeah, we better deal with the acoustics and we'll put some stuff on the wall or change the ceiling or like as paint. I don't think of it that way. I think of it as one integrated effort. No surprise that passion and that interest has caused me and our group to gravitate to recording studios. Can't imagine, obviously, anybody building a recording studio probably is interested in acoustics by definition, since, well, you can figure out why. People have been thinking about acoustics a long time, sometimes accidentally, which is what I believe is the case in these Greek temples. I've never really seen anything to show me, I've never seen any evidence to show me that they actually really were thinking about it. I've seen a lot of evidence explaining why these theaters sound good. It has to do with the seats and the geometry of the underside of the seats and how sound resonates up. Okay, but I've never really seen any proof that people were thinking about it. Okay? Louis Sullivan, the Great Hall in Chicago, where I do know he was thinking about it, although I don't know how much science he really knew. But I want to focus on recording, because recording studios, by definition, don't make very much sense unless you have something to record to. And I throw these up just to give you a sense of the dates, because it hasn't really been around that long. It's a relatively new idea, recording. Okay? You can see, early recording devices. So until we have recording devices, there's no reason to have recording environments. Okay? let's fast forward. There was recording in the 30s and 40s, but let's go to right after World War II, particularly. Why is that interesting? Because basically, Germany invented recording tape. We still say we record to tape. Of course, we don't use that much tape anymore. Still do a little bit, but not much. Okay, tape. We borrow, or we stole that idea, and now we have the beginning of what is becoming the great era of recording studios, because we now, for the first time, can really record to an erasable medium. Before, it was usually on discs, one-off, et cetera, et cetera. So here's a typical recording studio in the 50s, and except for some of the really cool gear there's some vintage stuff there that some of you might, well, it looks like a bunch of knobs and stuff to most people in the room, but for some of us, some of this gear still sounds amazing. What we're looking at is a room that's pretty unamazing, okay? It's pretty boring, pretty drab, and that has a lot to do with the fact that it doesn't really have to sound that good because everything's being recorded in mono. And there's a hard division between the engineering side and the artist side. Artists are people on the other side. Engineers and owners and producers are on this side. They really don't talk to each other. It has to do with the nature of the music business itself. Okay? So how do we get from that era, which is not that long ago? I'm living in 1950. Most people in this room aren't, but that's not really that long ago. Okay? Through the 60s, the hint is artists. You recognize who they are. Okay, in these studios. And how do we get to this kind of environment, of which we now have thousands? Okay, which, without really knowing what this is, are certainly more interesting. They have daylight, they sound amazing. Okay, great equipment, probably cost less per square foot than those did in the equivalent dollars. Okay, and they're architecturally inviting, they're interesting from an interior design point of view, etc. How do we get to that era in a relatively short amount of time? That's what we're going to talk about, okay? And that's what I do, and maybe that's what will be interesting to you after our few hours, okay? For me, I've always believed that the artists pushed it. I'm a little bit biased, possibly. I'm a musician by training and an architect by training. I went to architecture school, but was a musician. When I graduated, I actually thought I would be a professional musician. I was making more money, certainly, being a professional musician. So artists have pushed the studios, okay? And we went from this era of recording studios being owned basically by record companies, with very little exception, to now we're in an era where everybody has a recording studio. There's thousands, tens of thousands of recording studios. You hear headlines that the recording studio industry is over. That's just not true at all. One business model is over. Okay, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and we're not going to talk about that, but recording studios, there's more than ever. We can't even keep up with the amount of work. And pretty much everybody has their own recording studio in one sense or another. If you have an iPhone, you have a recording studio. So you all do actually have a recording studio already. You may not have a recording environment, but you certainly have the ability to record. So this era of artists, basically seeds of it start in the 60s, early 60s, really takes hold in the 70s, where artists started to say to the record companies, I'm going to have my own recording studio, and they're going to be kind of cool, and they're not going to be sterile, and they're not going to be boring, okay? And with that came better equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of examples of that. So one such example, no surprise, is exactly the title of this talk, is Jimi Hendrix. Now we know, now Jimi's legacy is of course his music, left way too early. A new album just came out last month, actually a really good album. They were holding those songs for years. And just FYI, those are the last 13 songs. There are really no more in the vault. I know that for a fact, but they were holding on to those for a long time. But Jimi was one such artist who basically said, that's it, I'm going to have my own studio, and it's not going to be in Midtown Manhattan, it's going to be down in the Village. There were no studios in Greenwich Village in 1969, 1970. He lived down there, okay, and I'm basically a project studio, although he built it to commercial specifications. Why can I talk about it? Because it was my first studio. So career tip, make your first project famous. That's the career tip for the day. That's all I can say. Lucky break, okay? Well, more like serendipity, okay? So a little history and a little serendipity, because it's kind of fun to think about it, okay? So this is the site of that studio. It's on 8th Street, still exists. It has never moved or changed its location in almost 50 years. That's what it looked like at the turn of the century, but that's the building that it was in and still is in. Now, the history on this building and its relationship to me in particular is pretty fascinating. So this is the original facade of the building, and the facade is still there. Some of the Bauhaus lines have disappeared, and the theater disappeared. It was built as a cinema in 1927 by a Viennese architect, Young, who had just come over from Europe by the name of Frederick Kiesler. Most of you have never heard of Frederick Kiesler. He really only designed 2 buildings. But in high school and in college, I was a huge Frederick Kiesler fan. I can't even explain how I even learned about him. I probably knew about him, that's him as a young man, from this building, which he did at the end of his career. This is the Dead Sea Scrolls Museum in Israel, which I had toured. But in researching him, I knew that he had done this theater, and I only saw a picture of it. First theater in America to not have a stage. Most early movie theaters were vaudeville theaters. Look how advanced this is for 1927. This is pretty cool. This theater I knew existed in New York, but I'm not from Manhattan, so I had no idea where it existed. It is the first floor, or the ground floor, of Electric Lady Studios. So, the studios in the basement. Underneath this was a club. It was a polka club for years. It's like a kind of a dance club underneath the theater. In the 60s, it became a blues club called The Generation. Jimmy used to go to that club all the time. I also used to go to that club. Down the road, I was at Princeton, because I was in a blues band, and that's where you would go to hear blues musicians. So it's 1966, I'm going to the blues club, okay? Even one night, remember seeing Jimi Hendrix. He was a left-handed guitar player. He was jumping on the stage with James Cotton, okay? I really didn't know too much about Jimi Hendrix, and I had no idea that I was in Frederick Kiesler's building. I didn't even know there was a movie theater up there. So this is kind of a little bit strange. A few years later, this is all going to come full circle for me. Okay, Jimmy, at the same time, that's my other favorite architect, is Antonio Gaudí. That's a younger version of me. At the same time, I get a little break in the summer of '68. It's even a crazier story. Designed a small nightclub in downtown in Soho. Cab drivers didn't even know where Soho was. But it became instantly famous. Got on the cover of Life magazine. It was a kind of a sensorium, light changing. You took your clothes off and put gowns on. And imagine the 60s. They were exactly as you would imagine, times 10. Okay, so it was a very fascinating club. And everybody went there. It only had a 9-month lifespan. But one night, Jimmy went there. At the same time, Jimmy is deciding to buy that blues club. I think he ran up a bar bill that was too big, and he buys the club. Doesn't buy the building, he buys the club. And says, find out who did this club, because I want him to do my club. White, changing colors, that's how he was thinking. And I literally got a call from him. I got a call from his manager, in fact, and did a design for the club. That's what it looked like, the club. Okay, this is the only other project I had done. You can see that I was interested in curves at the time. So Jimmy buys the club. This is the only drawing I have of the club. You would come down the stairs, okay, go on ramps, the circular stage. It's the only sketch I could even find. But what's interesting about the sketch is this word right here. He had an idea that in the back of the club, he could record everything that was being done at the club. Seems like an easy idea now, but not that easy to do then. Still not that easy to do, as a matter of fact. And very novel at that time. That didn't mean too much to me. I'd never actually been in a recording studio. Didn't know too much about recording. At the last minute, his engineer-producer, Eddie Kramer, now still a lifetime friend, Grammy Award winner, talks Jimmy into abandoning the club and making it a studio. Eddie didn't really care about clubs. He wanted to have his own recording studio. He had just come over from London. And that's exactly what Jimmy decided to do. So I watched my first commission disappear about as fast as it arrived. But they said, you could stay on and do the studio. I did remind them that I had actually never been in a studio. They said, well, why don't you see if you can learn about studios? I quit my day job, studied ferociously everything I could study. We hired another acoustician for isolation. I worked for him for free, doing his drawings in exchange for information. I created an internship, is basically what I did. It's exactly what I did. That's the seed of my internship program, which we've had for years. And kind of plowed through this. There's the layout of the studio. You can see that a lot of the curves were still borrowed from the club design. You came down the stairs, you still to this day come down the stairs, and now you see that it's a real recording studio. Very big control room. This is very, very different than that little room you saw just a few minutes ago. Why? Because basically, Jimi's idea is that artists would be in the control room and the studio. There'd be no difference between the two of them. A big giant piece of glass. This has changed many times over the years. This hasn't. And then there's a smaller studio in the back, et cetera, et cetera. That's the original layout. I drew this at night until I did leave my job. It's a much younger version of me. The whole studio was built with 6 drawings, if you could possibly believe it. You can't even do a kitchen with 6 drawings today. All by hand. And here's the section. You can see the sloping ceiling. There's the theater on top of it. The building is actually a really good building to build a studio in. That's the outside. Even the outside was curved. Unfortunately, this got taken down about 15 years ago. He never bought the building. It's one of the great real estate mistakes of all time. He and now the subsequent owners have been renting this building for almost 50 years from one family. They've made a fortune off of the Hendrix. And even this curve is kind of an interesting idea. So this is construction. It's a great building for a studio. First of all, very big ceiling heights. It's the lowest level, which is always the best place to put a studio, if all things being equal. You can use heavier materials, you can split slabs, you can use concrete instead of wood, instead of metal stud and sheetrock. So it was a good site. And the isolation between this space and the theater above was almost enough for a recording studio. We dropped a whole nother ceiling in, but it was pretty good. Frederick Kiesler came from Europe. Concrete construction really starts in Europe rather than here, so he knew a lot about concrete construction. This is a very well-built building. Took about a year to build it. You can see some of the footings being dug, but so we can put sand-filled 12-inch block walls between the rooms. It was obvious Jimi was going to play pretty loud. This ditch right here, one day they just went down 1 inch too much and the whole thing just exploded with water. We actually did uncover an underground, water table. It used to be a river. It's been a kind of a myth all these years. That's why it sounds good, because there's water underneath it. That's, of course, a lot of baloney. It has nothing to do with it. But it did cause a problem, and they still have pumps 24/7 to this day. There's the being built. Just to give you a sense of the construction. It took about a year. I would say today it should take about 6 months. It cost over $1 million in 1969, so think about how much money that is. It would cost less today. It's one of the few industries other than the computer industry where things have actually gone down in price. Took about a year, and there you go. So you can see some of the ideas still borrowed from the curves from the original club. This is still there. Nothing's really changed in this room. And the magic of the room was a little bit of luck. It's the ceiling that's doing the work. Lots of people have, for the river, and the Jimi is in the walls. I mean, I've heard more baloney about why the room sounds good. But it took many, many years before I really went back and made measurements to find out why it actually works, this room. And the trick in this room is the ceiling. And it was a little bit of luck. The shape is this kind of flat propeller, so that was a no-brainer. I didn't want it to be parallel to the hardwood floor for flutter echo. That's a pretty easy concept to grasp. You could imagine that that's not going to work. So we took the shape from the original club and kind of curved it around. Also, Jimi, every time you see a space, like right here or right here, we had lights, okay, so you could make colors. So this was a little hard in 1969. You had to have 3 different bulbs every foot and mix them like theaters. Now you can buy that stuff at Home Depot. But then it was a little trickier to do, but that's what he wanted. So the studio could be any color you wanted. But the reason why this is really working is because we used like a kind of a lightweight plaster. We took plaster and we basically used egg beaters, industrial beaters, to make it very full of air, okay, and then parged it on. So basically this whole ceiling was membranic. It's kind of like a timpani, basically. So it's working as a membrane absorber, which is a little, I don't want to really get into what that is, but basically it's absorbing low frequencies, even though it looks like it's hard. It is hard, but it absorbs low frequencies. So that's the trick in this room, is that the low frequency reverb time is kept down, which is the trick in big rooms. I had no idea that we were doing this It took many years before I even understood that concept, but it was just sort of luck, I guess. I don't know how to say it any other way than that. But you're entitled to some luck too. It's another career tip. Luck is welcome. Okay? So, amazing artists over the years. Unfortunately, Jimmy only lived for a few months before he passed away, so he didn't do much work in the studio. But it's unfortunate. But his legacy remains, for me, the studio. That's a younger Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
That's very young Jimmy Page, and a very, oops, oh no, you did not want to do that. Are you serious? Okay. Don't know why I did that. Evelina Horn. And when Jimmy died and left, it's almost like somebody was watching, because although it was built to commercial specs, it really was a very early project studio, because it was for an artist. He used it all the time. It was his exclusive studio. And then Stevie Wonder, who was working uptown, got very dissatisfied with his studio and basically moved in for a year and basically took over. So it's like one artist left, one genius left, and more or less another genius moved in. Maybe even more of a genius. Stevie was extraordinary. With his producers, Malcolm and Bob Margoloff, both have remained lifetime friends. And that's the synthesizer that was used on all those albums. We just moved it right into the, oh, thank you, right into the studio. Then he moved out to California. We did some studios for him too. But lots of other artists have been there over the years. Pretty much everybody's gone through it at least once. I like this one because you have to know who those guys are. If you don't know who they are, you have to leave. Okay. So lots of people there. This is about a week before this was torn down. So there's me a little older, and then Eddie Kramer, also now a little, we're all older. It was sad to see that go. It had to do with the owners wanting to grab about another foot because the theater got demolished. It got flattened, and it's now a health, it's a hospital. It's like an outpatient thing. It's very sad that disappeared. Control room has changed a few times over the year, but the studio hasn't. The mural that was in the lobby finally moved into the studio, but it's pretty much the same. There it is in 1970, and here it is about 3 years ago. Nothing's really changed. And it's still a music studio. It's one of the great music studios in the city. So for me, Jimmy's legacy was that it launched a life, and during that year and a half was amazing on a lot of levels, and allowed me to meet a lot of musicians. Before the studio was built, I had 4 other studios to design. It was kind of one of those things that just sort of unfolded and kind of have never looked back. And I realized that this love for music and love for architecture, this would be a perfect platform to combine these two. Okay? It's not like I woke up one day and said, let's design recording studios. There also wasn't really a recording studio designing industry. There is now. It's not a particularly big industry, but there is a universe of people who do this, and there's a knowledge base, okay, which makes it very interesting. Okay, but then it was sort of a lot of seat in the pants. There were no prefabricated acoustic materials. Now there's dozens and dozens of companies that make prefabricated acoustic materials that are good, that really work, and some of them look great as well. Okay, but the idea of personalizing a recording studio appealed to me. I've never really sort of left that track. We're going to take a look at lots of these before we're done. So Eddie only knows of about 4 pictures of Jimmy in the studio because he wasn't alive that long, and this is one of them. That's my favorite. I like it because it's black and white. The studio is rarely without color, so you have to imagine the color. So, hard to continue talking about this subject without some acoustics. I've distilled this down to 4 minutes because I didn't want it to be too painful. Anybody that's interested in more than 4 minutes, see me later or come to my class this afternoon at Berkeley, or we can have a chat about that. But okay, the language of acoustics is physics. The language of physics is math. So some of this stuff can get pretty nitty-gritty. But remember the challenge. Remember that first slide, okay? architecture and acoustics, architecture and science, okay? Architecture is, what is architecture? What is design, okay? Useful environments that inspire us, that make us fall in love with them, okay? The fact that they sound good does require some science, actually requires a lot. So acoustics is just simply the study and the generation of sound waves, okay? A lot of people draw them as waves, but they really aren't waves, that's just representations. It's packages of energy that move in a wave-like fashion through a medium. The medium we're interested in is air. You can have sound in water, if any of you have ever scuba dived or swim, if you've heard whales, okay? You can have sound in a steel beam, but we're interested in air. That's the one we're interested in, okay? So you can just see, the sound doesn't really move, okay? It's the packages of energy that just that get transferred. And it comes at a specific speed, okay? But this is the important slide. If we're talking about acoustics, there are 3 domains. We have to think about frequency, which is tone, low notes to high notes, okay, or beats per second. Then we have to think about how loud, how much energy. We express it in decibels. The higher the number, the louder, okay? And that's basically just a pressure information. Decibels is a logarithmic term, okay? So if you have one speaker at 60 decibels and another speaker at 60 decibels, you don't have 120. You have 63 actually, because it's a logarithmic expression. So, well, who cares about that? Anyway, and then we need some kind of time. Sound takes place in time. If you don't have a time window, it doesn't make any sense, okay? So when we start talking about an acoustic event, we have to describe things in all 3 of these universes. This will make a little more sense in a few seconds. Okay, oh, let's see what this sounds like. Hold on a second. There you go. I forgot about that. So that's very, very low to very high. Okay, this speaker probably doesn't go down to 20 hertz, so that's why you're not hearing the very, very low. Hertz is beats per minute. That's just what that means. Very low to very high. So that's just sweeping through the whole frequency. So this is the most important slide. In my world, in the acoustic world, and even in your world, if you're going to be sensitive to acoustics, a lot of interior designers here, you probably aren't going to be designing recording studios. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But you will be designing and you'll be involved in projects where acoustics are important. More and more. Actually, all of you will sooner or later touch it. The world is going in that direction. Noise codes, people want rooms to sound good, et cetera, et cetera. So there are 2 universes. There's the sort of isolation universe and the internal room acoustics. Isolation is, what do you have to do so that so you don't hear the garbage truck on the other side of the window, or you don't hear noisy students on the other side of the door, or you don't hear the air conditioning. So that's transfer, what I call transfer and isolation acoustics. That's where most of the money is. That's where most of the problems take place. That's the hardest stuff to get right, and it's the most boring, because you don't see it. You simply get credit if you screw up. You screw up, you get fired. You get it right, they just assume you were supposed to get it right. No fun, no glory, the most amount of money. This is where the glory is, and this is actually the easiest to get right. This is what happens when you shape a room and you change surfaces so that the sound behaves a certain way. Okay? So that's the easiest stuff to do, and that's the fun. Okay? So if we were to put a big curtain along that wall, we would change how things sound in this room. Microscopically, probably wouldn't change very much, but it would make a change. At the same time, that curtain could be blue or red. Whereas changing that concrete wall from 6 inches to 12 inches is probably not going to be seen, but you will have to pay for it. Okay? Why would you do that? Because there might be a noisy machine room on the other side of that, and you don't want to hear that. Okay? So which one of these worlds are you wrestling with is very important. Okay? And that's why you want to sort of abandon the word soundproofing. Whenever I see the word soundproofing, usually know I'm dealing with someone that actually really doesn't know what they're talking about. Does that mean putting the curtain up, or does that mean making the wall thicker? Don't know. Okay? This is where the money is. Okay? And the internal room stuff is where the fun is. So let's quickly look at that. The only thing you have to realize, the first thing we got to realize with isolation is how quiet do we want our rooms to be. We usually measure that in something called noise criteria. That could take an hour to explain what that is. The lower the number, the quieter. You can get, I thought this might be interesting just to give you some ideas. These are decibelic, but look, that's the universe that we're playing in, and sometimes lower than 15. Why does it have to be so low? Because if it's higher than that, you'll hear it on the microphones, and so it'll affect the recordings. Okay? This room, you could get it on your phone, right? Is your phone calibrated?
No, it's not. It's around
30?
32.
30. What?
32.
Yeah, it's 30 to 35. That's how, and it's a relatively quiet room, but this would not be quiet enough for a recording studio. You'd hear it. You just would hear it pretty much on most mics. So we're dealing with really quiet rooms, which means we need very robust boundaries and very quiet air conditioning. Okay? How do you do that? That's a lifetime to get that right. Okay? So as interior designers or people who are in charge of design projects, be sensitive. So what would help, besides just bringing someone into the project that knows how to do it, maybe in your initial meeting, why don't you try to identify which rooms you should at least be paying attention to acoustically. Obviously the storage room is not one of them. But the executive conference room, okay, get a little column that says acoustics, and we put a check next to it. At least realize, maybe that room should sound good. Or maybe that room should be a little quieter, or maybe that room should be a little bit more isolated, okay, because somebody's going to play films in there, or listen to music, et cetera, okay? So transmission loss between boundaries is pretty simple. You basically have noise on one side, and how quiet do you want it to be on the other side, and you need to make your boundary robust enough to get those levels down. Except it's not quite as simple as the drawing, because it's not just walls, it's floors, walls, and ceilings. And then even that's not so complicated once you get the hang of it. It really comes down to the holes and the penetrations, because you've never been in a room that doesn't have a hole or a penetration. First of all, how would you have gotten into the room? You can't get into the room unless there's a door. Pipes, outlets, lights, ductwork. So it really comes down to the robust selection of boundaries based on how quiet do you want the room and how loud is your neighbor. If the neighbor's not very loud, then you don't need as much robustness. But recording studios have a habit of being next to noisy spaces sometimes. For starters, they're sometimes next to the control room, which gets very loud. So sometimes their own neighbor is quiet, is noisy. Okay, so that's the process. Okay. And we get into these kinds of walls. This means sound transmission class. I just thought I'd put two of these up here just to give you an idea, because everybody here reads drawings, so you get an idea. So here's a typical wall, metal stud, sheetrock both sides, has a relatively low sound transmission class number. The number is a kind of an algorithm of 16 little numbers, 16 individual bands of sound averaged. It's not really an average, it's a different kind of weighting system, but forget about that. The higher the number, the better the wall. Let's compare some. Okay, so now let's look at this wall. This went from 44 to 70, and that's a lot, because these are decibelic notations. Going from 44 to 70 is huge. But how did we get it? Well, I have two walls. Each one has 3 layers of sheetrock. They're sitting on isolated floors that are built up on neoprene little things that look like ice hockey pucks. They're separated. That's some styrofoam, air, and now the ceilings don't even touch each other. So we got the beginning of a room within a room construction. So we now can start to get an aggregate sound transmission class, okay, much, much higher. Okay, and that's about as much as we're, so you can take pictures of all this, but I think they got to post all this. And I'll have it on our webpage anyway. But I'm just saying you don't have to work so hard if you don't want to. So that's how we get really high STCs. And that's what we're dealing with in the studio world. Very high STCs. Let's listen. Let me see if this is going to work. This is the first time I'm doing this. So. Okay, so that's no boundary. That's Eric Clapton just playing. So let's put an STC 44 wall between you and that noise. Hope this works. So it's pretty good. I mean, it's better than your bedroom, okay? And by the way, that's caulked, and the holes and penetrations are filled up, et cetera, but that's not good enough for a studio. I mean, if you heard that in a studio, and you were not recording Eric Clapton, which of course you wouldn't be, that's not gonna work. So 44, although it's pretty good enough for your house, maybe it's good enough for an office, but it is not good enough for a recording studio. So let's look at 70. Okay. I'm hearing it, you're probably not hearing it in the back. It's basically at the threshold of this room. So that's the difference, and it's an approximation through this speaker, through the PowerPoint, okay? So that's, you can start to see why we have to do this. Okay, don't quite have the off button on there. This usually results in increased mass and decoupling. Mass and separation, like floating floors, decoupled walls, floating ceilings. Things don't really float, of course, because we have gravity, so we have a whole universe of springs and isolators and decoupled floors, et cetera, and it's a pretty robust industry. Okay, it's quite scientific. There's a lot of good manufacturers that know what they're doing, but it is a science, and it's expensive, but we have to deal with it. God is in the details, okay? Look at this top detail of how an inner wall doesn't touch the ceiling. The slab-to-slab wall does touch the ceiling in this metal copper sheet. I mean, I think most of you can read these drawings. And this is, that thick's actually twice what a real wall is. Sometimes it depends on the projector, okay? But you gotta get your act together on the details. Even this is important, because as you add sheetrock, the spring is gonna depress. So you have to have that material correct. So God is in the details on this stuff. We were just talking about that at lunch. You want to know if you need site inspections. Yes, you do. This is what an example would look like, a little sequence here. This is a ceiling. That's the detail I just showed you. So we hang some rods. They put the isolators in, fill up the holes to make sure we don't get any leakage there. There's some fireproofing, which was code required. The black Chicago bars, then the furring channels going across. First layer of sheetrock, then we're going to put two more. We don't put seams on top of seams. We cross the seams so they're not on top of each other, okay? We like to use plywood as the middle layer. It helps a little, it gives you a better boundary, and also it gives you a nailer. And now means you can screw anything anywhere, so you don't have to worry about framing, because we're usually hanging things from the ceilings. And these are two rooms. This is a living room studio, and this is a kind of a media room in an apartment, both using that detail. I throw this up to make sure that you don't forget that interior design, passion, color, texture, feel, look, does not have to be sacrificed with acoustics. Okay, it's the same process. So both of these rooms use that detail. Okay, but if we don't get that, and they're both in residential towers, so they're both going to play very loud, but can't disturb their neighbors. Same, and of course this recording studio, which looks, this is what you think a recording studio is, rather than the other two rooms, also use that detail. Sometimes we get into much more advanced isolation. Look at this guy up here. This is a floor plan of Electronic Arts in Vancouver, 4-wall system. Why? Because I have one studio here right up against another one. They're both going to get loud, but it's going to be two different pieces of content. Why? Because I didn't have any room. What I really should have had here was a corridor or a storage room, like here. There's another suite right here, and that's the way to isolate it, but we didn't have any room, so we have no choice but to use this very, very high SDC wall. It's in the 80s. Very, very high, and that's the wall right there. This is not a presentation drawing, this actually was one of our construction drawings. It's a 4-wall system, 2 separate floors, poured concrete. There are 2 different levels, but that's the advantage of being on the ground, is that you can split concrete floors. If you're not on the ground, you have to use some kind of isolator system, and it gets more complicated. That's another example. That's the same room. You can see the walls coming up, room within a room, another room within a room, separated. Everything else in here is interior room acoustics. A projector, speakers, there's a screen that comes down, etc. And that's the room. Again, no sacrifice on architecture. Okay, so what looks kind of geeky and studio-like still can have passion and expression and feeling. Okay, enough for isolation. How do we make what can we do for our rooms to affect how they sound when you make sound in the room? Obviously, extremely important in studios. Well, there's a lot of things you can do. Basically, at the end of the day, we can change the shape and we can put things on the surfaces. That's pretty much all we can do. And what could we put on the surfaces? We could put absorption, materials that absorb sound. We could put materials that reflect sound, which usually most people think is the same as not doing anything, but not necessarily, okay? Or we could put things, we could put surfaces that diffuse sound or scatter sound. And we can do these for each individual octave band of frequency, because not all materials behave through the entire frequency range. It's maybe the most important concept in acoustics. This carpet is very absorptive at high frequencies, but it's not doing anything at low frequencies. It's reflective at low frequencies. This ceiling, very absorptive through most of the speech frequencies, not particularly absorptive at low frequencies. Concrete, reflective at all frequencies. Okay, so different materials behave differently. That's what makes it fun. Okay? Let's look at a few characteristics. The easiest one to look at is reverberation. How long does it take for sound to die down in a room? Okay, and this room is pretty dry. Okay, so what would affect reverberation? I'll help you. Basically, reverberation, which we call RT60 because it's defined as how much time does it take to drop 60 decibels, but just call it reverberation. It's not the same as echo. Is proportional to volume. If the volume of a room is bigger, it's going to be more reverberant. That's pretty obvious because it takes longer to get to the surfaces because the distance is big. That's a no-brainer. And it's inversely proportional to the total amount of absorption in the room. Also obvious, if you start putting fluffy stuff everywhere, and foam and curtains and big styrofoam balls, or 50 more kids with coats, the room will get deader because you're sucking up sound. So proportional to volume, inversely proportional to total absorption. And in fact, that's exactly what reverberation is. It's that stupid. It's so stupid and so simple, it took everybody a few thousand years to figure it out. And the guy that mastered it did it in Boston, Wallace Sabine, about 100 years ago, right across the river. And we call a unit of absorption a Sabine, because we name it after him. We put some numbers on this to get an equation, because to go from proportionality to stuff you can work with, so forget about the numbers. It's just that simple. Okay, so we can change the volume, okay, or we can change the amount of absorption. We change the amount of absorption by adding surfaces, by changing our surfaces. That's architecture, that's fun, that's design. So let's give an example. Here's a recording studio. This is a rendering of a recording studio in China. Okay, it's this big giant room here. This is a great facility, Village Studios in about 2 hours north of Hong Kong. Okay, this room has a lot of things that can change. It's got a whole curtain system that can run out. Okay, these panels flip, believe it or not. So we can change the reverberation of the room. We can change the characteristics, okay, of the surfaces. And to show you, this is how we designed it, because as we were designing it, we'll talk about that in a minute, we were sending files to China to show them, okay, is this going to be bright enough for you? Is this dead enough? Because this room is the home of the symphony orchestra for that city. So let's look at the difference, okay? So when the room is at its brightest, when all the surfaces are the most reflective, no curtains deployed, etc., this is what a drum sounds like, okay? Which could be useful for some people. For instance, Eddie Kramer, who recorded all the Led Zeppelin, for all you Led Zeppelin buffs, that's exactly how he gets that sound. He puts two mics in the biggest possible room he can grab, which is any room, okay, really, really high, then adds a little bit of reverb, okay, and does a few other tricks, which we won't discuss, and that's his signature drum sound. On the other hand, if you're a country and western guy and you record in Nashville, you don't want that. You want a really tight, dead drum sound. So we probably wouldn't use this studio, but if we did, We would get that room as dead as possible, draw the drapes, et cetera, bring some gobos in, carpets, and this is as dead as the room could get. Tighter, right? Okay. So that's reverb. It's a very old characteristic. When I say old, it's been around a long time, at least 100 years. We know a lot about it. We got a lot of information about it. It's relatively easy to calculate. It's relatively easy to predict. So that's one signature. It's not the only signature of a room, but it's one of the most common ones, and it's one that we use a lot to define rooms. Okay? This was the slide that I should have put up first. Sorry, out of order. This is all we can do in rooms. We can change the geometry. We can have surfaces that are reflective. Sound goes boom, and comes right out. We can have surfaces that are absorptive. It hits there and it doesn't come out. It gets sucked up, gets transferred to heat, basically. Okay? Or diffusive surfaces on a frequency by frequency basis. That's all we can do. Every room has this kind of diagram. Okay? You're hearing me with direct sound, and then you're hearing reflections a little bit later in time. Just a little bit, because they take a little bit more distance. Distance and time are the same thing. Okay? Sound moves at 1,130 feet per second, relatively slow. Well, it's fast, but it's relatively slow compared to light, for instance. Okay? So if something bounces off and comes, you're going to hear it a little bit later in time, a few milliseconds later, just a little bit later. And that extra time, especially if it hits a surface that's reflective, and it arrives pretty high in level, remember if it's absorptive, it's down in level, that begins to define the characteristic of the room. It's how you can tell whether you're in a big room or a small room. Okay? So if you don't have this, you're not in a room. It means you're outdoors. Or you're in an anechoic chamber that's all completely absorptive. So the simplest way to describe it is, there's the direct sound, it hits a wall, and it's like you get an extra little bit of sound, if this is hard, if this is reflective. This is no good. This little bit of extra sound coming a few feet later, a few milliseconds later, is called a comb filter. It's probably the bane of our existence in very, very high performance spaces. It doesn't have too much to do in a space like this, but it will affect critical listening in the rooms that we're designing. So how do we deal with that? Well, the easiest way is to just put some absorption there. And you still have the diagram, you just don't have level anymore. Or we could just change the geometry. And this is one reason why you see control room shapes kind of always looking a little bit odd in their geometry. It is not because parallel walls are bad. That's a huge myth. That's going to be the title of a book someday. There's nothing wrong with parallel walls. Parallel walls, when they're reflective, can cause a flutter echo, but that's pretty easy to eliminate. Usually when you see that kind of geometry, it's to get reflections to move around in a certain way in a room. We'll see lots of examples of that. Okay, enough of this stuff, and see now you don't need that absorption. The sound just is bouncing away maybe to the back of a room, and where it's maybe going to hit a diffuser and scatter. Okay? Comb filtering is exactly what that will cause. What does that mean? Energy coming just a few milliseconds later, which can cause stuff to come out of phase. Forget about this diagram. You're not going to understand that, but let's take a look at this. So this is a console. We got 10,000 of these in the world. Everybody's mixing, and you've even seen movies, or you've been in studios with speakers that are sitting on top of the console. I can't believe people still do that, less and less. And what happens most of the time is there's the direct sound, and there's the indirect sound bouncing off particularly big consoles, or they don't even have to be expensive. It could be a table. Okay? So this bounce is coming just a little bit later because the distance is a little bit more, maybe 2 or 3 milliseconds later. Okay? And you're going to hear that. Okay? That's going to be a comb filter. So how do we solve that? Just move the speaker back a little bit. And you're seeing more and more people doing this. Why am I showing you this? Because I want you to hear the difference. Okay? Now you don't have that bounce. So this is geometry. Geometry is architecture. That's why I like it so much. Okay? So let's take a listen to this. What's all this? This is just the frequency response of a speaker in air. Just in a testing lab. Relatively straight. I know it looks very, very ziggly, but that's actually a pretty good response. Relatively flat, and then it rolls off at the end. There's like 50 speakers that behave like this. This speaker probably looks like that, almost, I think. Actually, that speaker looks like this. This guy I don't know about. But this one's pretty good. Okay, but what happens when we put it right on top of the console and we get that bounce? Okay, that comb filter causes certain frequencies, right around 1,000 hertz and 3,500 hertz, to really go down. Whenever we see this, that's geometry. That's a bounce that's causing that. Let's listen to what it sounds like. I think you can hear the difference. Okay. Now listen to it the way it's supposed to sound. What's happening is that right in these speech areas, right in these frequencies, it's really being pulled down. Okay? That's geometry. That's not processing, that's not electronics, that's not the speaker, that's just that bounce that did it. Okay? Note to everybody here, we cheated a little bit. We actually, we pulled it down a little bit more just to make sure we could really hear it. But it's easy to hear in a listening environment. So geometry is everything, okay? And it's exciting. It's exciting to sort that stuff out. Okay, so there's a kind of a geeky side to this, and then there's a kind of cool architectural side to it. Okay, so in big studios, which you've seen pictures of, or you've even been in, with a big piece of glass in the front because everybody likes to look out. Nothing wrong with glass, but that can be your enemy. The speakers get on top, and then look what happens. And that's why, believe it or not, a lot of studios with these big speakers, they don't mix in those studios. They just record in those studios. They don't do critical mixing. So how do you solve that problem? Well, one solution is to move the console back, okay? Or maybe the console itself doesn't cause that bounce. Some consoles have a high backsplash. Try and bring this down as low as possible. For years, we just kept, each design, I kept lowering it an inch until finally we got about as low as we could get it. Okay, another trick is this angle right here, so this can come down, but you can still see out. Okay, or maybe bring the speaker down into the glass, which is a little weird because then you don't have the glass. Maybe the solution is to make the glass be the speaker. Whoops, maybe getting ahead of ourselves there. Although I just saw an article, did you just see anybody get wired? They're thinking about speakers in cars. The glass will be the speakers. Did you just see that in Wired? Yeah, I just saw it about a week ago. They're not that far away from it. It shouldn't be that hard for cars because they know they know where everybody's seating. If you know exactly where everybody's seated, it's a huge advantage. In cars, everybody knows where everybody's sitting, I hope. Okay, so this is a little awkward, although we could do it, and we have done it. It's not my favorite design, but we have done it. We've actually brought the speakers down. Always better to have ear level monitoring. Sometimes we don't even have glass. Sometimes we have rooms with no glass, like mixing rooms, mastering rooms. Sometimes we put the glass to the side, which actually I think is better. I think you actually have better sight vision by looking to the side. And now the speakers are ear level, so you don't have this big console bounce. Again, geometry. So I'm in a world, am I thinking about equipment? Am I thinking about acoustics? Am I thinking about geometry, physics, all at the same time? All at the same time. To me, that's exciting. To me, I'm passionate when that all happens. So sometimes we're trying to figure out a sight line, a door swing, an angle of a speaker, looking up an absorption coefficient. It's all happening at the same time. The better you get at it, it's like playing piano. You start with the right hand, and then you do left hand, and then there's that day when you play them at the same time, etc. Okay? So all of this is mostly applicable to high frequencies. What about low frequencies? When you get to low frequencies, the wavelengths, the associated wavelengths are really big because wavelengths are inversely proportional to frequency. Low frequency, very, very big wavelengths. Sometimes the wavelengths can be bigger than the room you're in, which is a whole nother problem. So now we have something called room modes, okay? Let's forget about that. Or standing waves. What does that mean? Pretend there's a room that only had one dimension. That's easy, that's a mental exercise. And we threw some sound in there whose wavelength was twice the dimension. That's the lowest frequency. In other words, here's a frequency, okay? That's a wavelength. And then it comes again. Okay? That's the lowest frequency that can be maximized in between those two surfaces. It doesn't mean you can't play a one that's lower, but it won't be reinforced. The wave won't stand on itself. That's why they call that word standing waves. Okay? So that's called the eigentone, or the fundamental frequency of that dimension. Rooms have 3 dimensions. All rooms have 3 dimensions, even if they're not rectangular. And so it's not too hard to imagine calculating the x, the y, and the z axis, or width, length, and height axis, to see how they generate these waves. The goal is to get these wavelengths, or eigentones as they're called, or standing waves as they're called, nothing wrong with standing waves, distributed as evenly as possible, so you don't get pileups. You don't want the room to artificially reinforce one sound and unartificially unreinforce another sound. So you can quickly see, this is the formula behind that. Let's just don't pay attention to that. Here's what it looks like. Let's take a room that's 12, 24, 36. Now I purposely chose a room that's multiplied by 12. So you can imagine that this is not going to sound so good, because look, the first fundamental produces that based on this equation, very simple equation, okay? And you're going to see pileups at 48 hertz, 96 hertz, 144 hertz. You're going to see these frequencies be reinforced. It's as if you had the notes on a piano not tuned evenly. All we have to do, okay, you see how they pile up on each other, okay? Now the same room, I'm going to show it on a logarithmic scale for some of you who know the difference between linear and logarithmic, and you can see that they start to look better. This is important because we don't hear linearly, we hear logarithmically. We have twice as many notes in each frequency, okay, twice as many beats per second. So the calculation is linear, but the way we hear is logarithmic. Let's skip that concept because that's a little bit grim, okay? But now look at this room. I just kind of chose one artificially. Notice none of them are piled up. So we have a much more even distribution, okay? And even better logarithmically. So you might say, well, there must be one room that's the best room. Well, there isn't. It turns out there's hundreds and hundreds of rooms that are good. There's a few rooms that are really bad, like a cube, for instance, would be awful. It would be a terrible place to start, or a square, okay? So when somebody once called me, I picked up the wrong line, and said, I have a 20 by 20 room in my basement, what should I do? Well, the first thing is we got to get rid of the 20 by 20. Somehow got to get that 20 by 20 in. So I said, build a closet, okay, which I thought he might hang up, but he didn't. So we had to keep talking to him. So the closet now makes a room that has a much better proportion. Then I said, orient the room sideways rather than long ways. It seems counterintuitive. Why? Because, let's see, because if here's a listener, and there's maybe 2 speakers there and there, okay, a side bounce coming back to you would be much, much further away. So it's going to come back much further in time. A little bit of absorption there, it'll be down in level, and you won't have a comb filter. Okay, so always better to make the room wider than deeper if the ergonomics allow it. If the ergonomics don't allow it, then you have to go back to a different approach. So you don't want to start off with an acoustic preconception. Acoustics is just part of the design process. Generally speaking, we don't start off with acoustics. We usually start off with programming. Same thing you start off with in interior design. What has to go in the room? How big is the console? How many people? Are there any cool views? Any columns, doors, et cetera, et cetera? All these things have to be thought of. But if everything's equal, a side-oriented is always better than a long orientation. Okay, so let's take a look now. Things are a little bit more advanced here. So this is Paul Epworth's studio where Adele does her work in London. Okay, and when he called, he said, I want my studio white, and I want the color to change with the lights. And it was like nothing had changed in 45 years. It's like I hadn't gone anywhere. I said, well, that's a good idea. Okay, but so all of this changes, as you can see. Okay, so every one of these materials is doing a particular thing. But we didn't start off with the materials. We started off with a vision. Actually, in this case, started off with a color. The color went to lighting. Then a desk, actually spent a lot of time on this desk, which had to do with specifically how he worked. That gave us speaker placement, then modal calculation. Then there's a whole process in our office where we look at low frequency analysis. How's this room going to behave modally? Then we start putting different materials, okay, in certain locations to squash certain modes. So this material right up here, okay, behaves in this way. It's very, very absorptive, okay, at this very, very low frequency, okay? And then this material here behaves also differently. The perforated wood over here, also very, very different. In this case, he actually wanted this material. He didn't know what it did, but he saw it in another studio and liked it. So it just sort of looked acoustic. It is acoustic, but it behaves in a certain way, okay? So again, we go from here through this, at least I did, okay, to this. That's really where this studio is. It's part of Jazz at Lincoln Center. Just thought you might want to see the floor plan. And it looks into a very big rehearsal studio room and also looks into another recording suite on both sides. It's now the home for either XM Radio or Sirius. I guess they're both the same now, right? Yeah, XM. It's the home of XM Radio in New York and also the home at Jazz at Lincoln Center. Okay? So what can we look forward to before we start having a tour of some of these rooms? This is what I think in the acoustics world, okay? And some of this is happening already. This is what's making it very exciting right now. Prefabricated acoustic materials. Almost 50 years ago, no prefabricated acoustic materials. You had to basically take normal materials and use them acoustically. But now we have a tremendous universe. So that picture that I just showed you, Paul Epworth's studio, okay, almost everything here is prefab. I can buy this, and it's very well tested, and we know exactly how it behaves. This is stretched fabric. Behind it is a low-frequency membrane absorber. I know exactly how it behaves. There's now acoustic plaster. Plaster that looks like plaster. It is plaster. You bang on it, it's hard. Sounds just like foam. Completely absorptive. Microperfed wood that's absorptive. So these materials exist now. It's kind of cool. It's very exciting. Okay? Low frequency control, which is really the problem. Low frequency is really the issue in small rooms. And we spend most of our time dealing with relatively small rooms. Okay? It's a little complicated to explain why that's a problem. You'd have to know a little bit about the math behind the modal analysis. But dealing with absorbing low frequency historically has always needed treatments that are very deep. Think of like big pieces of foam, big wedges of absorptive material. But there are other ways to absorb low frequency, membrane absorbers, resonators that are thin. So thin low frequency absorption, cheaper and thinner, is now arrived. It's been around for a while. We understand the science of it. So that allows us to control low frequency behavior in small rooms without using 3-foot deep traps. So that's very exciting. Even this world, which is relatively boring, has gotten better. New people every year, another person makes a better door, a better isolator, a better spring. Okay? These are the fun ones. Okay? We now have lots and lots of ways to measure this. I mean, $20 on an iPhone gets you a lot of measuring equipment. Okay? And so computer-aided measurement is now state-of-the-art. Pretty much everybody has it. So it takes a lot of the voodoo out of this stuff. We can make accurate measurements. And when we can make an accurate measurement, then we can talk about it and we can compare it. But I saved the best for last, which is the ability to predict. Wouldn't it be nice if we could listen to the rooms before we built them and know exactly what they sound like? So we might be aiming for this headline. Bland buildings, science makes it unnecessary to erect the auditorium and then test it. We can know what it's going to sound like before it's built. This headline we have to not have because we had it already. Okay? And that was the New York Times headline when Wallace Sabine announced his findings based on his work across the river at Harvard for a few years, and basically came up with the basic formulas, the basic Sabine reverberation formula, which is exactly what I put on before with some numbers in front of it. Okay? He still wasn't able to listen to drawings, but for the first time he was able to put math, okay, on drawings and get a sense of what they would sound like. They basically predict reverberation, which is one of the main characteristics of a space. But wouldn't it be cool if we could listen to them? Well, let's see if we can. It turns out we can. been around for a while, and it's finally arrived at, I would say, desktop computer level, auralization, okay? So and this to me I think is exciting. When I first saw this, or saw that this was coming, this was a big moment for me. I've had 2 or 3 moments when I said that's enough. Done about 3,500 studios, that's a lot of studios. Start to get repetitive sometimes, but when this started to happen, this kind of took it to a whole other level. Let's look at this church as an example. This is a really good example to see this. So here's a church in Switzerland. That's what it looks like on the inside. So you can imagine what this sounds like. There's not an absorptive surface in it. Everything in this church is reflective. Concrete, wood, stone, more stone, concrete, even the top, these are sort of wood, little fins, and then through the wood, it's concrete. The whole thing's concrete. So this is an echo chamber. And that's exactly what it sounds like with 2 pretty crappy speakers. And what goes on this church? Every Sunday, a man speaks. That's not a rock and roll church, it's a man talks. And finally, this little building committee realized that unless they put headphones on everybody, or have speakers in front of everybody, they got to change the acoustics. They got to do something in this room because they can't hear anything. So let's listen to this room. So we got the job, our office in Switzerland. Let's listen to what the room sounds like before we changed it. So that's just blasting some pink noise, a tone. Pink noise is like a sound that has all frequencies in it, okay? Equal energy per octave rather than equal energy per frequency. But basically equal energy throughout the entire frequency range. And then we just shut it off. So that's not very good. Let's listen to it.
In language, infinite many words can be written with a small set of letters.
So that's a test tape that we have. That sentence has every vowel and every consonant in it. We got a lot of test signals. So we just ran that through the system. But look at the curve. Here's the frequency bands from low to high. Speech is right in here. And here's the reverb time in seconds, not tenths of a second, but seconds. This room is maybe 6/10 of a second, 7/10 of, but maybe a half a second. This is a very relatively dry room, mostly because of you, the carpet, and the ceiling, okay? So this is not a half a second, this is 5 seconds, 6 seconds, 7 seconds. I don't even think the Boston Garden is 6 seconds. In fact, I know it's not 6 seconds. And that's what it sounds like. No wonder nobody could hear anything. Look at the speech bands, 5 seconds. Okay, so that's why it sounded like that. So what we did was we measured it, then we modeled the space. Now comes the key. Okay, so that's what a model looks like. It sort of looks like a 3D Revit model, you know, or kind of a wireframe model, but we're only interested in putting as many, the smallest number of surfaces, okay? But what we're not interested in is things like doorknobs and window frames and all that other stuff, because that's going to really confuse the computer. So each one of these surfaces, first of all, they got to be closed, okay? And they have to get assigned an acoustic characteristic, like absorption or diffusion, which we have. Either we assign it, which is a little tedious, or we now own it because we have libraries of this material, okay? So if we go into a space, how do we measure the reverb time? Well, in this most simplistic way, we speaker, calibrated microphone, test signal, grab the data, boom, it gives us an impulse response, which I won't explain what that is. It's kind of a signature of what's happening, okay? And boom, presto, we get the reverb time. Suppose we could do that in reverse. Suppose we could get the impulse response from a diagram. Well, you could. Put a speaker in the diagram, put a microphone in a receiver, a receiving point, okay? Shoot all the rays out diagrammatically and make sure that they hit all the surfaces with the exact characteristics that we want, and we can get the impulse response. We can convolute that, so to speak, basically turn it around and push a test tone through it, and we can now listen to the space. That's what auralization is, okay? In its very simple 20-second explanation. Okay, so that's what this model would look like. Sort of looks like a 3D model, but it doesn't have a lot of the imagery because we're only interested in surfaces. Okay, it's not desktop stuff. I mean, it's very there's only 3 companies that sort of make this software. It's expensive, it's kludgy, it's awkward to use, but it's extremely powerful. We've tested all 3. We use one in particular. Okay, so now we can go backwards. This is different than algorithmic design. Everybody's kind of big buzzword right now, algorithmic design, everybody's seeing it. This is one design at a time. We kind of take a stab at what things should be, and then we change all the coefficients, and then we run the computer. Sometimes it takes lunch to do it. It takes an hour maybe to run it, because there's a lot of calculations. So what did we do? Well, the first thing we did was we kept modeling the space until the test signal and the signal from the oralization sounded the same. So when I did this,
In language, infinite many words can be written with a small set of letters.
when we went to the building committee, we went with calibrated headphones. We did it twice. Once was the measured one, and once was from the drawing. Of course, we just kept changing our coefficients until they were the same. That got us the job. They said, you got it from the drawing? I guess you must know what you're doing. We knew what we were doing before that. But anyway, so now we can now calculate or listen to what's going on. So this is the goal. This is what we think it should be, deader and flatter. Now we cheated a little bit. To tell you the truth, the design of this took place in about 3 seconds, because when you walked into the space, at least for me, there was only one thing you could do. What could we do to this space that did you think everybody would sign on to lower the reverb time and make more clarity? Anybody got an idea? Pretty obvious. There's only one surface you could tackle. Well, you could change that surface a little bit, and that would help on some direct reflections, but not enough surface there. You gotta tackle a lot of surface. There's only one surface. There's a ceiling. It's the only one that they'd let you do anything with. What, are you gonna change that? Change this? No. This is, by the way, this is not that far from Ronchamp, the Corbusier church. You can see that they kind of borrowed some Corbusier. Anybody been to Ronchamp? Anybody know what I'm talking about? All right. Yes. Corbusier, Ronchamp, yeah. They almost understood it, but anyway, ceiling. So, I mean, it was obvious. We're going to take down these slats. I'm going to take all that concrete. I'm going to put fuzz on it and then put the slats back. That's obvious. At least to me it was obvious. So that's what we did. Well, let's just model that and see what it sounds like. That's not algorithmic design. That's just intuition. And then let's test it. Still pretty powerful. So that's exactly what we did. This is what we thought it would be when we changed that much surface. Let's see what it sounds like. Okay? Well, you can already see it's going to sound better, right?
In language, infinitely many words can be written with a small set of letters.
Right, now you can hear, because we lowered the reverb time, so the clarity is better. Okay, because we just added a ton of absorption on the ceiling. And we did it but what this program allowed us to do was, we left air between there's actually duct liners, very cheap insulation, black because you wouldn't see it. And by changing the amount of air through different pieces of it, we fine-tuned this. Okay, so I'm distilling this to its simplest form. But the big benefit here is that in this diagram, which vaguely looks interesting to everybody in this room, is highly uninteresting to the 6-man building committee in Western Switzerland. Believe me, they don't even see this diagram. They didn't see this diagram. They just listened on headphones. Is that okay? Yeah, that's fine. And so that was our, and then we did the work. That's exactly what they did. They took down the ceiling, put up this black fuzzy stuff, and put the slots back up. And 3 months later, nobody knew we even did anything. We put in a better sound system also. Okay? So it's not algorithmic design, but it is an amazing tool, because it's proof of concept. Okay? And for a building committee in Western Switzerland that kind of didn't really understand what this meant. To me, I look at this and I know what this means, but you'd have to really be familiar with these numbers and graphs to understand the difference, but everybody can listen. The other thing that it did was, even if we could have introduced more absorption, like for instance curtains, maybe big medieval tapestries or something, I don't think I would have done it. I think this is enough.
In language, infinitely many words can be written with a small set of letters.
Because it's a church. So it's supposed to have some reverberation. It's like, Moses coming down there. So even if we could have made it deader, I don't think we would have. In fact, this is a problem with a lot of these big modern churches. They're actually too dead. So then they have to add reverberation back into the sound system because they're building them out of contemporary materials like this stuff. Okay, or they get their calculations wrong. This is the comparison. There was the curve originally measured. Okay, this was the measurement with acoustic treatment, and that's the simulation. You can see very close. I mean, in my world, that's pretty close. Actually, we got it a little bit deader than we even wanted it to do. So it's a pretty powerful tool. This is very exciting stuff, and we use this on a lot of our big rooms. Let's look at this room in China. Okay, that's the room that I just showed you. Okay, and that's exactly how we got those. That's the control rooms. Okay, that's that studio. That's the CAT model. That was one of the many CAT models. And we kept changing the materials and surfaces, and we would send the files over to China. We'd put them up on the internet. We sent them calibrated headphones, and that's how we designed it together on the other side of the world until we got it comfortable. Because the rock and roll clients, they needed to be dead, but the orchestra needed it to be bright. So we got two very, very big extremes, almost up to 2 seconds and down to 1 second. And we already saw the demonstration. This is the studio. I thought you might want to see it being built. They bought this building, which they thought would be easily renovated. I walked in and reminded them that this needed to be torn down because what am I going to do with this piece of junk? So they did tear it down, but they had to put up a building that was the same size. Welcome to China. And that's exactly what they did. We'll just sort of the same size building, but now built correctly out of concrete. It's a 4-wall sand-filled block system. There's a corridor in between it, 2 walls and then 2 walls. So the trick here was the corridor that ran around the scheme. Isolated floors. The original drawings called for the slabs to be split. And one day they sent this picture. We asked you a question about supervision. I said, where are my floors? Where are the split floors? I should have seen lots of lines in the floor. Where are the separate slabs? And he said, well, the builder thought it would be easier if we just poured it all at once. I said, yeah, definitely easier, except now you just have a problem. So we had to completely redesign it. See, it was supposed to be separate slabs, not touching. So now the whole thing had to be redesigned with built-up isolated slabs. Cost an extra $250,000. Everything had to be imported. They didn't, believe it or not, they don't make these isolators in China. It's they made them they came from Belgium. So now we had to go and bring all these guys in, set up the steel, rods. See, now we have separations between the slabs. So they had to pour all separate slabs. When if they had just taken the time and followed the drawings, they would have saved all of this. It was a nightmare. Wouldn't have worked if they didn't do this. You would have had leakage between the rooms. So there it is being built. That's that high ceiling up here. Sheetrock, plywood, sheetrock. That's pretty much what we do for most skin. This way, if you have to screw something into the ceiling, you can. You have plywood there, and we do. All these boxes are going to get screwed in. Those are membrane absorbers. So that's all low frequency absorption. We're on a platform here. That's the rendering of the high ceiling. There it is being put in. Control room. In this case, the control room's really, really big, so the speakers on top of the glass are going to work. That's that layout. So the trick here was this corridor that ran around the entire studio, which then allowed this studio to be separated from this giant studio and this studio, but you could see through them. So this control room can record this room, this control room can record this room, or they can use this for rehearsal, which is in fact exactly what they do. So that was the trick. That had nothing to, so was I thinking of isolation? Was I thinking of ergonomics? Was I thinking about programming? Was I thinking about architecture? Was I thinking about glass sight lines and who sees what? Thinking about all of them at the same time. That's the fun. That's the art. That's what I'm in love with. So there it is being built. I just thought it would be interesting for you to see this come. The people who built this had never built a studio. It's actually pretty well done for their first studio, I can tell you that. Not easy. See the separation in the walls? It's a rendering on the control room, rendering of the studio, and that's a client. It's kind of a young rock star out of Hong Kong. It's his studio. Guangzhou, and that's the orchestra. It's a city of 10 million people. So that's their symphony orchestra. They rehearse in that room. So, my prediction, studios will all become personalized or project studios, except I don't really think it's a prediction. I think they've always been personal and project studios. Studios, as I know them, once we got into that great era in the 60s, always have had to have a personality, and everybody in this room should recognize that. Everybody in here are designers, okay? They all need a personality of some sort, even if they're not owned by one person, even if they're corporate studios. They do have and do want a personality, and they should have a personality. So we're about to look at a lot of studios. The only thing they have in common is that I was involved with them. Other than that, they're all different. You might see certain similarities. Okay, we use certain tricks repetitively sometimes. A lot of the equipment is the same. Most studios have two speakers that are symmetrically oriented between 30 and 35 degrees because that's kind of an industry standard for stereo. Okay, so yes, they're all going to sort of look the same, but as you look, if you can kind of look past some of that, you'll start seeing that they're all different. And we're going to continue to have more and more studios. So let's just start. I put this one up. Actually, this is one we didn't do. I just thought this was just ridiculous. So a lot of equipment. It's a great, actually very cool synthesizer wall. But let's just start looking at them. I'm going to just flash some and I'll stop on occasion. I think one of the things you're going to start to notice is that almost every material is being used. Okay, we're way past, if I want a surface to be absorptive, I don't have to use foam. I don't have to use stretched fabric over insulation. I can use foam and I can use stretched fabric over insulation, but I don't have to. Okay, we'll point out examples of that. Why is all this wood? Because that's what he wanted. This is in the country setting. He wanted his studio to be wood. Okay, but each one of these planks has a little airspace between them. That's actually doing something for me. So the ceiling is actually absorptive at low frequencies. Okay? These are perforated and slatted, also working as absorbers even though they're wood. Glass does not have to be your enemy. Actually, glass can really be your friend. In this case, you want to have this panoramic view over the Hudson River, you've got to have glass. Why does this room work? This room works because of this little hanging piece of plastic. See that little guy right there? This little guy has microperfs in it. So that piece of plastic is actually absorptive. It's behaving exactly the same way as a curtain or a piece of foam. I don't really care about that one, which is right over there, but I do care about that one, which is right over there, out of the picture. Because if I don't have that one, okay, the bounce off of this speaker is going to hit that glass and come back, and I'm going to have that comb filter effect. So once I put one on one side, I need it on the other side. So these two little hanging perforated pieces of plastic are what's saving that room. So yes, you can have transparent absorption. There it is. Studio in the attic. Again, another one overlooking the Hudson. Very inexpensive ceiling diffusion. Okay, up there with Velcro. Going to see a number of studios that sort of have these clouds, hanging suspended clouds. Why? Generally speaking, if you see something like that in these pictures and it's fabric, it's probably hiding something above it. Usually a membrane absorber of some sort, basically something that's about 4 inches thick, so like that. Maybe we put a few of them up there. They're out of metal, and they work sort of like tympanies, so they're absorbing very specific low frequencies that are tuned to the z-axis, to the height axis. Most studios, the lowest dimension, thus the troubling dimension, is usually the height. That's why you usually don't have enough height. So if you're using a membrane absorber, you want to try to put it in the axis that is the troubling axis. Well, I can't put it on the floor. I can't have a piece of metal on the floor there. How are you going to walk? So we usually put them on the ceiling and we hide them with this, and then we use this to put lights in it. And sometimes the air conditioning is over the top and it comes out the side. So we've fooled around with this for a long time, this kind of cloud-like effect. This is a church. Studios are all over the place. So here's a studio in a church. That is the church. There's the studio. It's a great little studio. Again, Start to see that cloud design. Whoops, variable acoustics. So these doors open. When they open, they reveal fabric wrap panels, so the room can get very dead. They can bring in carpets and gobos. Why would you do that? Maybe if you're recording a vocalist, okay, or an electric guitar. But if you're doing acoustic instruments, you want to have it bright, okay? So a little bit of variable acoustics, we use that a lot. So this is a church that has a studio. Here's a church that went out of business, so the guy bought the church to make it a studio. Great sounding room. That's the big giant, was the sanctuary, and we basically put a control room in one end of it. Okay, isolated the control room. See all the double wall construction, and it has a double ceiling, and then just left everything else the same because I wanted the volume, I wanted all that volume. The studio in Milan, 3 studios that are up the stair. That's the courtyard that you drive into. You walk in, big kitchen and dining room. Food is everything in Italy. Everything's about the food. Okay, and then up into the studio. So this is kind of cool. All triple wall construction because all the studios, everybody can see everybody. Most of the work that's happening is in-house work. So they want to see each other working. So easy to do on paper, not so easy to do in reality. That's one of the big rooms, looks like. Only in Italy would they come up with these colors. Very cool. Skylight, you don't usually think of a skylight in a control room. It's a little bit of an odd feature. But turns out it wasn't too bad. We just put a little angle on it so that any sound bounced off into this trap area over here. So that's a view looking down into all the rooms. Very difficult to do, very expensive, but real estate in Milan is very, very expensive, very hard to get. Okay, so necessary to have these rooms all next to each other. This is a destination studio. There are still a number of destination studios, basically resort type studios. This is a few hours out of New York, near Woodstock. That's the water supply to Manhattan, as a matter of fact. It's the Ashokan Reservoir. So it's this room that the owner wanted to chase. This is the room that really sounded amazing. We thought we could put the control room in there, which is that room there, but in the end it didn't work out, so we just added the control room right on the back with a brand new, actually a pretty big one. And that's the room that we chased. The magic of this room is the fact that the walls were very thin. It's actually a summer cabin. It's a very big summer cabin, but it was a summer home for the Pitcairns, who own Pittsburgh Glass. And so no heating. So the walls are actually relatively thin. So thus, they were low-frequency absorbers. The low-frequency energy was absorbed by the walls. How? It just went out of the walls. Okay, it was absorbed because it just simply went out of the building and went to China. So when we soundproofed or sound isolated this building, because we had to, because of the rain. You couldn't record here, the wind, the rain. Literally, we built the building outside of the building. I mean, there's only 2 ways to do this. We either put something on the inside, which obviously we weren't going to do. I mean, how would we even begin to do it? They built the building on the outside of the building to look like the building, but we had to leave an airspace. We left a 6-inch airspace with furring and then built a building outside of it, multiple layers of plywood, and skinned it with cedar siding, painted it to look exactly the same. The only way you would know the difference is if you knew what the chimney looked like before and after, because it came in a little bit different. Okay? And if we didn't leave the airspace, then that boundary would be very, very thick and solid, and it would not be a low-frequency absorber. And it would have completely changed the room, and not for the better. So this was a tricky calculation. That's the control room, very big. We won't talk about that. That's the little sunroom that originally was supposed to be the control room. That's not Photoshop. That's actually what it looks at. So you can see why we were pretty. So a whole inner layer of glass on different angles. Studio in Argentina. 2 composers, film composers, each one with their own control room. One of the first questions I asked is, do you have to look forward? One person said, absolutely yes, and the other guy said, I don't care, which to me meant no. So we made that the surround mixing room. We did some surround in this room too, but this is the room where they do most of their mixing. Okay, and this is the room that the guy wanted to look for with a shared studio. Because most of the time they're composing. So that's the room. Over time, we've figured out how to get pretty much all of our designs with the speakers at ear level. We don't do too many rooms anymore with high speakers. They just, the console bounce is just not a good thing. So you'll see a lot of studios where the speakers are at ear level. Studio in San Francisco. Here we popped up this skylight, kind of this industrial building, and we made this light chute, kind of popped it up right there, so we get daylight in this room. Allowed to have fun. You're supposed to have fun in studios. 3 control rooms, each one looks into a shared studio. Most of the time they're not using the studio. So that's the, see, it's like a light chute. So that's why that looks like it's daylight, because it is daylight. Studio in Syracuse. We'll just start plowing through these. Vermont, the barn, restored barn. So here, I wanted to look sideways because of the nature of the speakers and see the side-oriented room. And I wanted to look forward because this gets daylight in here. It's like a high window. I didn't really need to look to the left into this lounge fireplace, but I convinced them that it was just a nice thing to look into the fireplace. Really, I needed it for symmetry. There's very little argument against symmetry. Actually, there's no argument against symmetry in a control room. 2 ears, 2 speakers, stereo, and now with 5.1 or even 7.1 or 12.1, we're still always going to be in a stereo or symmetric environment. So there's no argument against symmetry. So it's a rendering, and then that's the studio. This antebellum sort of mansion in Atlanta. This is a guy who does children's music in his home, so we built a small control room. This is completely isolated, and this is his living room. We sealed the windows, etc., did the best we could, and he just doesn't get loud after 10 o'clock at night. He's in a quiet neighborhood, and he just doesn't play loud. So sometimes you can solve isolation with social solutions. Okay, that's the control room. I remember him asking me, what do you think about the books? And I said, I see diffuser. I don't see books. I see diffuser. So I said, the more the better. This is East Hampton, Grammy Award-winning engineer. This is her private studio. Kind of tacked on the building, made it kind of look like the rest of the house, but it's really a block building. It's 12-inch cinder block, and then we covered it with wood. Okay, and there's the plan and section. So here we're having some fun with the cloud. Okay, but basically this is behaving the same way as the last few that you've seen. We're just having some fun with the architecture and the shapes. Sometimes we put the air spilling in and coming over the sides here. There wasn't enough room. I forget why. We just put 2 linear diffusers, very quiet. Cynthia Daniels, that's my other half, that's my wife, my partner. It's a studio in Switzerland. There's that same perforated material again, becoming pretty popular. So let's look at a few. These are studios for some people you might know. Okay, so this is one of the guys from Skank. This is one of Brazil's biggest bands. This is their private studio. I throw them up here mainly to show you that they're not really different from non-artist studios. All studios are personalized. All studios are private. They're all different. So this is Green Day's studio. Here, the cloud is the low-frequency absorber. So here, it's not fabric covering something. It is the membrane absorber. Why? Because I got a lot of air on top of it. So we're using 2 different thicknesses of plywood to sort of flatten out the response a little bit. So the plywood is technically moving. That's what's going on here. At low frequencies. At high frequencies, it's a reflector. So I put it at an angle, so anything that hits it bounces off, doesn't get into the listener's position, goes to the back of the room where it hits a big diffuser. So when you see a room, when we see a room, we see 8 rooms. We see a room at 8 different octave bands. The computer sees it at 20,000 octave slices, but 8's enough. Or a low frequency room and a high frequency room. Dealing with high frequencies is not terribly difficult. They kind of behave like straight lines. They bounce off like pool balls. Not very difficult to deal with, conceptually. Computers make it very easy. Low frequency is a little bit different. But even this room is behaving differently at 8 different octave bands. Not critically different, especially in the speech frequency. But for instance, if you put music in this room, absolutely certain frequencies would behave unsatisfactorily. The room wasn't designed for that. The room is basically designed for speech. Jay-Z studio in New York. This is Timbaland studio in Virginia Beach. I tried desperately to talk them into viewing this sideways, and they just wouldn't. They almost were ready to go for it, but they didn't. They were just too used. Fito Paez, one of Argentina's famous artists. So here, he does a lot of rock and roll, but he also does film scores. So we needed a room that could really change in its acoustics. So every one of these big giant doors opens up. When they're closed, it's wood. When they're open up, it's absorptive. And the ceilings have all these motorized flipping panels. Okay? This is manual because it's pretty easy to open, and then this is a motor. And that's the control room. You saw that picture before. And that's the studio. Here, the doors are all closed, and we got some of them in miscellaneous positions. We can go from about 4/10 of a second to about a second. That's a pretty big swing for a relatively small room to be able to change the reverb time at 1K at 1,000 hertz. That's pretty good. It's pretty successful. And then motorized screen for scoring, et cetera, et cetera. There's some of the doors are open. These are just playback monitors. They owned them. They're much bigger than they needed. They just owned them, so they used them. Carter Burwell. Carter Burwell got nominated this year for soundtrack film. He does the Coen Brothers movies, so he got nominated for the billboards, the 3 billboards. He didn't win, but he finally got nominated, so he was happy. So he's done a lot of film scores that you've listened to. This is one of his studios. This is his New York City studio. So he sometimes mixes and sometimes composes, depending on what he's doing. So we have sort of 2 different stations. Over, it's on the top, one of the top floors overlooking Manhattan. Complete room-within-room construction, because he lives in a condo. Okay? And a very simple look, which is the look that he wanted, but this is all fabric, so above this is all active low-frequency absorption. Okay? Alicia Keys' first studio. She's owned a few studios, very tech-savvy. Wider than deeper room. Just the right amount of equipment. It's actually the first one of this is a kind of a hybrid console, half digital, half analog. It's the first one in Manhattan, first one in the New York area. This is interesting in the back. So this is curved in a convex way. So at high frequencies, it's scattering. Okay, but at low frequencies, in between each of these little 4-inch strips of wiggly wood is an airspace. So it's actually working as a Helmholtz resonator, kind of like blowing over a Coke bottle. Certain frequencies are enhanced, certain frequencies are absorbed. They're not really being absorbed by the glass. It's really a phase change. Okay, so this is a Helmholtz resonator for low frequencies and a scattering element for high frequencies. So same over here. This is all built out of the same material. The garage, actually he named the studio Paradise Garage because it was his garage. He actually left the garage doors up. And of course, obviously not a garage anymore. That was for, remember C&C Music Factory? This is one of the C's. One of them died, one of them lived. This is Robert Clavelis. So a lot of schools. Berkeley, of course, your neighbor right here in Boston. A lot of studios. This is their Valencia facility in the Calatrava building, which was a lot of fun to work on. And down the road here, there are studios. Maybe some of you have visited them, so we throw those up. And these are all on the lower floors. The building is basically a dorm, as you know, but the studios are all down in the 2-story basement. Just flashing through some of them. That's the film mixing room. So that looks a little bit different. That's their scoring stage, NYU. This was interesting because this floor has this giant girder that goes from here to here. I mean, it's like 10 foot high, big giant girder, because the floors above don't have columns. Or it's the other way around, or floor below doesn't have columns, something. Anyway, so literally, these doors and windows had to be conceived first to fit into the girders. It never had this problem before. And then we figured out the room. The other cool thing is when you come off the elevators, they wanted to see the studio. Wasn't quite sure how to do that. So basically the back wall is a diffuser, but it's glass. So it's kind of nice. So when you come out of the elevator, you can see through. You see the lines. When you get up close, you can actually see the control room. So it's exciting, but it's still a diffuser. The nature of diffusing materials is not really important. It just has to be hard. So it could be wood, aluminum, metal, plastic, concrete. Just, it's the geometry that's doing the work, not the material. So that's it. Let me just see something. Is this? Yeah, okay, it's me that's looking at everything on an angle. Okay, so now this room is set up, I believe this is 12-1 now. It was originally 5-1, now it's, I think, a 12-1 room. Yeah, because they got some upper speakers now. They do a lot of multi-channel work at NYU. That's the recording room, including this room. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about this kind of room in a few more minutes before we finish. So they do a lot of experimenting for multi-channel, up to 64 channels. Actually, we're here. So now, that was kind of a tour through a room, very fast one. That every one of those rooms had a client, everyone had a program, a different equipment agenda, a different site selection, a different budget. I haven't talked very much about money, but it's a big deal. Okay, nobody sees, well, some people have enough money, but most people don't. And the ones that do have enough money, they don't have enough time. Okay, so every now and then when you run into someone that says money's no object, that's the worst problem, because that means they want it tomorrow. Like rich rock and roll guys. So now that becomes a very different kind of headache, which you may think it's not a headache, but it actually is, because time is much harder to get than money. Much easier to get more money. It's hard to get time. So they all have different agendas. And it's sort of putting those agendas in the blender that's fun. Everybody's hearing a lot about this. This is kind of along with algorithmic design, immersive sound, 3D audio is what it's sometimes called. AR, VR, these are all very popular buzzwords. Not quite sure where this is all going to settle when the dust finally settles, but I know two things. The big guys will probably be in charge, like the Dolbys and, et cetera, et cetera. No surprise there. And it will settle down, okay? In fact, it's going to settle down so quick that this 3D, what you're now calling 3D audio or immersive audio, you'll just call it audio. You won't call it 3D audio. It's like, does anybody ever say, I'm getting one of those stereo CDs? No, you don't say, you did in 1958 or 61. I remember getting an album, the first stereo album, and it came with a setup diagram on the back. I can remember this. Of course, we didn't have any stereo. It was just a little box in the living room in Long Island where I was living, so we didn't have two speakers, but had we had a system with two speakers, we could have put them where they were. I just put the record on and listened. And for a while, it was a big deal. Stereo, stereophonic, blah, blah. Now, of course it's stereo. What kind of, and okay. So this is all going to settle down, but it's going to take a little while, and there's going to be a lot of arguing and a lot of fighting and a lot of voodoo. Okay, but it is happening, and it's exciting. So this is, for me, this is the next big thing that's arriving, and we're paying a lot of attention to it. Okay, so how are we going to enjoy immersive audio? Well, we already have been enjoying immersive audio. That's the thing that's kind of annoying me. The film industry has been deploying surround and immersive and or 3D audio for years. No big deal. So we're going to continue to enjoy it, but we're going to start seeing these kinds of rooms. Okay, lots and lots and lots of speakers. And the big guys like Dolby, okay, and DTS, they're all vying for production chains as to how to mix in this environment and how to deliver in this environment. We're going to see 3D audio in headphones that already exists now without hardware. The 3D is embedded in the files themselves. That exists. Sennheiser has it. A company called 360 here has it. So we're going to see more and more of that. So that's a lot of fun. Okay, so we'll see these kinds of rooms. And we're going to see it in this mode. Okay. You know, it's limited. But, you know, 98% of the world listens to audio like this way. You go in China and you can't talk to anybody. Everybody, actually, New York City, you can't talk to anybody. Everybody's listening to audio that way. And we're going to see this. I hope we don't see this for very long. This is kind of silly, in my opinion, but this will change too. These will become cooler. Probably going to, I think you're going to see, instead of VR, you're going to see AR, which means they're going to go through regular glasses with lasers and stuff. So this is all changing very, very quick. So it's fun. So how are we going to produce immersive audio? Again, we've already been doing it. We've had 5.1 rooms for a long time. The 5.1 rooms easily can become 7.1. You just saw 12.1, 12 meaning 12 speakers, and the 0.1 is usually the low frequency. Okay? So here's an example of a kind of a sort of a stereo setup that then can become a 5.1 film mixing or surround sound. Most of your TV, most of your delivery on most cable networks are 5.1 and surround, sporting events, et cetera, et cetera. So we've had this for a while, and we'll continue to have this. Here's another example. Okay, rear surround speakers. Okay. This was a DVD mixing facility that was named Mikasa because most DVDs ended up in houses. So he figured, why don't we make it look like a home? So why don't we do it in a home? And that's exactly what he did. Of course, DVDs have they're disappearing about as fast as they came. Most people are streaming. Again, more film-like surround or immersive audio mixing facilities. The principles of these rooms are not terribly different than what we've been discussing for an hour and a half. Low frequency controlled isolation is exactly the same. We just have more speakers to deal with. So when we have more speakers to deal with, we have a few more reflections to deal with. But this is going to be a standards war. And the guys who are fighting it are not people like myself or people like yourselves. They're going to be people like Dolby, because there's a lot of money at stake in which systems get to be chosen. So we're sort of cautiously watching this all happen. This is a big studio in Moscow. Actually, this is a very famous studio in Moscow, but then they went and redid their control room. And for the life of me, I don't know why they insisted on an American designer. It was very, very strange. It was my first question. I met them in Holland. I said, why are you even talking to us? You got a lot of smart people in Russia. They said, we don't want to use, we want a Western designer. All right, well, that's what we did. So again, ear level monitoring, 5.1 standards, no big surprise. This studio you saw earlier for Electronic Arts, Jazz at Lincoln Center, also 5.1, so it's been around for a while. Okay. So these are Atmos. All these last few are Dolby Atmos. So that means multiple speakers. And instead of assigning sound to speakers, sound is assigned to positions. Okay, so up until recently, if you wanted to emulate stereo or surround, you put a certain amount of sound in each speaker. So you had to know where the speaker was, and you assigned it to the speaker through a console, through your mixing procedure. This is very different than object-oriented mixing, which has been around for a little while and is the basis of the Dolby Atmos system. There's a few other systems that use it. Now, sound is placed in a position, an actual real position, or it can move in a certain set of positions, and then processing, a box of some sort, tells it where to go based on it knowing what speakers you have in the room. It's a very, very different way of mixing. This is probably going to take over. I would imagine that this would. It's actually, the difference is night and day between object-oriented mixing and speaker-oriented mixing. So we will see more rooms like this. That was that NYU room. This was built as a lab. This is about 5 years old. They kind of really didn't know where this is going, but I think we're going to see more and more rooms like this that almost look like shops, almost look experimental. Okay, as people start figuring out where speakers should be, depending on how they want to mix or how they want to perform. So we're going to see this kind of stuff. Okay, and this excites me. I like this. This is exciting. And the acoustic challenges for an environment like this are very much so. Because at first glance, you look at this and say, I got no choice but to make this room very dead. I have speakers firing in every direction. I either make it extremely diffuse or extremely dead. Either one is going to have its set of problems. So these are very interesting challenges, and we're wrestling with this right now. Or rooms like this. Or rooms like this. So these last three were rooms we did not do. I kind of grabbed them. I know what these rooms are. Are they labs, experiments, playback rooms, composing rooms, mixing rooms? Which universe is going to be interested in this kind of sound? This is not happening in your living room, so this might happen in lobbies. This might happen in theme parks, hotels, different kinds of theater experiments. Or we may have to mix in rooms like this in order to distill it down to a digital file that will then allow you to hear this through headphones, through binaural stereo headphones. This is already happening. Okay? That guy from an hour and a half ago, when you saw the picture of Stevie Wonder on the left, you don't remember him, Bobby Margoloff, he's now 80 years old, Grammy Award winner with Steve, that was his synthesizer. Okay? Already took Superstition and remixed it into 12.1 for headphones. He didn't really need permission since he recorded it. He had the tracks, he already owned the tracks. Okay, he actually did get permission from Steve. It's an experimental. So it's already happening. So we'll be producing music in environments like this, experimenting with music in environments like this. I'm not quite sure if this is going into your house, but this looking better with seats and lights and doors and exit signs and fireproofing and all the other stuff that you have to deal with, okay, with lobbies and popcorn. This is going to be the future entertainment. It's not a big push to go from this kind of picture to interesting environments that you will design, that you should design. So let's conclude. Let's get out of here because they're going to throw us out. So almost 50 years later, it's coming up on 50 years, which is either very exciting or very depressing. I'm not quite sure when I look at that number. Okay, still dreaming, still exploring, still pretty passionate about it. Some things are changing in my life, grandkids and other kinds of things and whatnot, but I find all of this very exciting. I started off by saying I don't really see that much of a difference between thinking about a console, speaker angles, whether the wall should be blue or red, the material, geometry, a budget, okay, even boring stuff like codes. How do we get in and out of a room? What do we see when we look through the window? Lighting. I like thinking about them all at the same time. You don't really think about them all at exactly the same minute, but you don't paint one on top of the other. There is an order to how you do things. People often say, well, where do you start? What's the first thing you start with? So if someone asks that, we'll answer it, but until someone asks it, we'll skip that. You got to start somewhere. It's like if you're going to write a song, where do you start? Start with the chords, start with a theme, start with the first word, start with a rhyming scheme. Depends. Ask Paul McCartney. Okay? So you sent me this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm using this now. And I'm thank you, Sandro. Okay, so why am I putting this up here? Dave, you heard of Jimi Hendrix, probably never heard of Dave Van Ronk. But he's a folk song hero from the early 60s, one of the great Greenwich Village captains of industry, and kind of was the gatekeeper of the village for a while when guys like Bob Dylan arrived for the first time, et cetera, et cetera. So in this little recording, he explains how a very famous blues legend, Mississippi John Hurt, talked about tempo on a live performance. Listen to this. It takes a minute, but then it's kind of cool. So just listen to this. Here's Dave Ron. Follow it for me.
Actually, seeing him do those tunes while they were tuned, he had 2 tunes on the anthology, and he did both of them that night. And it was, well, he did Frankie.
It's the name of a song.
Frankie's Blues. And it was slower than I remembered him doing it. Also, his voice seems to have dropped in pitch and timbre. And afterward, I went backstage to meet him, and we were talking. I was trying to figure out a nice way to ask him, you know,
Why did he slow down?
And I broached the matter very tentatively. I said, you know that song, Frankie's Blues? And he said, oh. He says, you want to know why it's so much slower than it used to be? I said, yeah. And he said, well, you know that song was so long that they had to speed it up to get it all on one side of a 78. That brought the whole thing to life for him.
I can just go. So, why do I think that's interesting? Understand what happened. He recorded it, okay, exactly the way he sang it years and years later. They had to speed it up to get it onto the record. The record could only hold. That's why all the songs from the 50s and 60s are less than 3 minutes long. It's not that somebody couldn't write a 4-minute song. Of course they could. You just couldn't get it on record. And then albums changed everything. And now, of course, now there are no limits to lengths of song. But that's why all those songs all seem to be so short. Okay, and so what's my point? It's the Marshall McLuhan, okay, axiom. The medium is the message. Okay, and so as the medium changes, it affects the art. Is art changing the medium, or is the medium changing the art? Are artists really driving our recording environments? Or maybe our recording environments are helping the artists to go do something else. Okay, if we now have the ability for 64 speakers, okay, instantly going through an iPhone, through a $400 box and putting sound wherever we want, does that mean we should put sound wherever we want? Okay, the early days of surround sound audio are just awful. There's more shitty recordings than good ones. People were just putting sound everywhere, until finally everybody stopped and said, well, wait a second, maybe we should have some intelligence about it. Just like there's some bad stereo mixes. Just like some of the great stereo mixes are actually not much more than mono. Okay, because that's basically where it should be. Filmmakers, if you talk to filmmakers, they're not all of them are crazy about immersive audio. Filmmakers have always counted on audio coming from the front, okay, to help steer what's going on the screen. Okay, they say, wait a second, now we're going to have audio on the back, we get people going to turn around, etc. So I thought that Sandro sent this to me, and I remember when I listened to it a few times, and then all of a sudden the bell went off. I said, I got it. This is a very, very cool little thing. The medium can go backwards on us, or it can be our friend and it can be our partner. I think it's both. Okay? And so 50 years later, after I first got that tap to go experiment with colors and lights and changing environments in a room, which is basically what happened. For 3 hours, we just changed environments. 1 minute, it was psychedelic. Another minute, it was New England. We had artificial snow falling, and people would come out with hot cider. And then the next minute, it was all safari projections. And those guides, because they were guides, sort of like the hostesses, would actually change very quickly, and they had like African outfits on. So it was kind of an experimental, environmental theater done with very primitive equipment. We had very limited budget. Okay, still playing around with lights and color and changing environments. This is a restaurant that we worked on. Okay, here's a studio we did in the Middle East. Okay, the studio is interesting, but this is the view that I really like. Okay, here we got those ceiling big membrane absorbers to actually be the lights. Instead of having lights around them, or we got them to be the lights, so we made them out of plastic. But this is my cool shot. You know, you got to sort of respect. Whoops. Sorry. Those clouds are now the sort of eastern lattice work, doing exactly the same thing. Or this psychedelic setting for Marcella and her partner in Miami, okay, who do basically a lot of urban hip-hop music. Okay, and we had one room with a disco ball, okay, and another room all decked out. Again, custom to each person. Now, why am I putting this one up here? This is a rather old studio that we did, not that, about 20 years, 15 years ago. And this was when surround was first coming out, and my idea for this studio was to have a surround speaker placement. Let's just look at the front three, forget about the ones in the back. in a two-wall system out of glass, and then I'm going to connect the front edges of the speakers with glass. Why? If you connect speakers with a boundary, you eliminate a certain effect, which is this sort of rear bounce of the speakers. And that's why you see a lot of speakers built into walls, okay? It's the speaker boundary interference, SBIR, or a baffled speaker solution. So I said, you know what I want to do? I want to kind of make it so that these speakers look like they're in the glass. That was my idea. So we'll build on paper, we'll build a two-wall system, place the speakers, and connect it with glass. So when we're done, it'll look like the speakers are in the glass. Well, that's not exactly what happened, okay? It turned out that this frame got a little bit thicker, and I should have had them at the same level. Then they made it wider because of construction. I didn't know they were doing it, and they put these frames around it because they didn't understand what I was talking about. And so instead of it ending up looking like one glass with speakers in it, it ended up looking like a bunch of holes, all different shapes. But it sounded good. The speakers were at ear level, and you could see in. So at least the proof of concept was done. I said, we got to get this right. We got to make this wall thinner. How are we going to make this wall thinner? Maybe we can do it as just a 1-inch piece of steel. Okay, so we get really, really thin, and then we can make everything the same height, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of worked out, and I said, maybe we could get the speakers right in the glass. And so finally we got an opportunity to do it. And we did. And the trick had been learned. The trick was that the wall that held the speakers had nothing to do with the isolation. That was the real trick. We did learn that from that first one. So here's a two-wall system. In this case, it's masonry with two big, thick pieces of glass. And then there's an entire glass wall that just has glass boxes. Okay? And, well, it was easier to draw it. The people said, have you ever done this before? We told a small lie and said we had, which of course we hadn't. It was a little bit touch and go because this is a religious music company in Brazil. You don't want to really lie to a religious music company. That's not a good idea, but, you know, sometimes a white lie. And of course we did it. We were figured it out. And finally, the dream came true. We were able to put speakers right in the glass. Of course, the ultimate dream is that the glass becomes the speakers. We're not quite there yet. And, you know, we had these two, in this case it worked out really well. Most of the weight for these speakers was in the back. So most of it fell down on the pipes. And the trick actually is to make this glass not that thick so that it vibrates a little bit, so it's membranic. So actually that front glass in the room is a low frequency absorber. It's working as a baffle, but it's also low frequency absorption. The room is wider than deeper, that's the other trick. And then there's a few other tricks happening in these surfaces. But I mean, it's a wall of sound. I've listened to some Beatles mixes in this room. It's absolutely extraordinary. And we've gotten to do this a few times now. We've gotten better and better at it. So that sometimes your first project, a project, it doesn't come out exactly the way you want, but you pick up what you learn, and you move on to the next one. It's a little frustrating sometimes because a lot of what we do, you draw it, you have an idea, but it may not get built for 6 months or 12 months, maybe sometimes 18 months or even 2 years. And I mean, you know, every time you walk into a finished project and you're going to see something you don't like. If you don't see something you don't like, you're not growing. You're not artistic. You wouldn't be human if you didn't see something you didn't like. So it's a little frustrating to walk in and see something that you sold to someone and you convinced them it was good. People are hiring you because they think you know what you're doing and say, oh, I wish I did that differently. Okay. Sometimes you get most of it right. We try to get most of it right. But you wouldn't be a human if you didn't get it. So this is the layout of that whole church floor, the main recording floor. On top of this is a big giant sanctuary room, but this is Paul's studio. Diffuser in the back with colored lights, so it doesn't look out onto any glass, but it is changing color. Looks out into this hall, which gets daylight. There's that little writer's room that we looked at. It's that room over there. Okay. And this is a trick we've been doing for a while. By angling these frames, which is not easy to do and a little bit on the expensive side, the speakers can be at ear level because we don't have that much glass in the front, but the vision into the sightline vision is actually pretty high. Every time we do a studio, we always test what percentage of the live room do you see? We try to get that as high as possible. So that was it. Paul wanted a white room that changed colors. It's like my life hadn't gone anywhere in 45 years. And that's what we did, and of course, that's what the room can do. But the real trick in the room is these guys. These splayed, these are reverse splayed. So these are microperf, actually not microperf, slotted and perfed treatments. So they're reflectors at high frequency, absorbers at low frequency. So that's the real trick in the room. Room can be any color you want. The guy who did the lighting was pretty cool. It's like, kind of has a wheel. You can paint the room any color you want. So this is all almost off-the-shelf stuff. 45 years ago for Jimmy, it was a nightmare. 3 different colored bulbs and theatrical dimmers and mixing and whatnot. Now you just press in a number and you can get it. And that's that writer's room, changing colors as well. This is Jungle Studios in New York, an award-winning studio. Again, changing lights. Glass does not have to be your friend. They went to 50 sites before they finally got one. This is Alicia Keys and Annie Mincielli. It's their studio that looks out over the Empire State Building. There's the speakers inside the glass again. That's actually my favorite view. I like what's holding up that wall. That's another. So again, another refined version of that ceiling. We've got about 3 or 4 studios where we've been playing with this shape, what angle and the thickness of the plywood, and sometimes we put lighting on the edges. In the case of that studio in the Middle East, we actually made them the lights themselves, etc. So why would I end with this? Or we're close to the end here. So I look at this and I see a really, really cool string quartet room. This looks like it would be an amazing room for a string quartet or, you know, a cappella group, very bright, very reverberant, every surface. But that's not what this room is. This is a speech room for a pharmaceutical company in Basel, Switzerland. This had nothing to do with music. Maybe they play a video sometimes or a film that has some music, but I should actually Xerox this out or trim the picture. That's the giveaway. Nothing to do with music at all. So how are all these hard reflective surfaces that would be probably really good for music working in a speech room? Well, it turns out they're not hard. They're hard, but they're not reflective. All of this wood, if you look carefully, is all microperfed. So all of this wood is actually absorptive, basically behaving exactly like curtains. Half the glass is microperfed, tiny little holes in it. And then the glass itself has air spaces between them and was modeled in that same software that we showed you before. So the room turns out to be quite dead. There's actually not very different than this room, even though it's bigger. Just the opposite of a music room. What is this showing us? We're no longer limited by our materials. The vision of this room were these wood walls and this glass chandelier. Frank Geary's the designer. When Frank says wood and chandeliers, that's it. You guys figure it out. Actually, he doesn't even tell you. One of his assistants tells you. And that's our problem, was to get it to work. That was his vision of the room. Okay? Same thing here. Raphael Vignoli, our architect, good friend. Okay, I would not start out with a giant piece of glass as the backdrop for my theater, for my stage. That seems like a dangerous beginning. But when you have a $1 billion view overlooking Central Park on the 6th floor of the Skidmore Owen SOM building, that's what you start out with. So Raphael's vision was 2 parallel gray walls, one here, one behind us, and this swooping Aerocerenin type ceiling that basically he borrowed so he borrowed the ceiling from the Dulles Airport. The 2 walls he borrowed from 5 billion pieces of architecture, and the glass he inherited. Okay? How do we get it to work? That's our problem. Well, the glass wall is a double glass wall for isolation, and we take the inner wall and kick it up. Okay? So that any information on the stage hits this guy and goes up. I don't want it coming right back, because that's going to cause a little bit of a nightmare. But I don't want to lose the energy, because mostly this is Jazz at Lincoln Center. This is Wynton Marsalis Orchestra. It's mostly what's playing here. They do industrial, so that's why they have the speakers. But when it's mostly acoustic information here. So we want the information staying in the room. I don't want it leaving the room. So now it's going up to this ceiling, which is really a bunch of tubes. It sort of looks like one swooping ceiling, but when you study it close, it's like tubes with about 8-inch spaces between them. So the sound goes through and now hits hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those same little diffusers that you saw on the ceiling of that studio that overlooked the Hudson River, little cheap 2x2 styrofoam diffusers that we painted black, so you don't see them. So all the energy goes up through the ceiling, hits the diffusers, and comes back down into the room, very diffused, very sprinkled, almost like a mist, like an acoustic mist. So that's the solution. On the walls, it's all fabric. If you were to take the fabric off these walls, because no one's touching it, no one ever really goes up against the wall. There's a kind of a railing there. So if you were to take the fabric off the walls, you would see a checkerboard of absorbers and diffusers that were all positioned and specified based on modeling in the room. So what looks like a very simple, hard swooping ceiling, piece of glass where it shouldn't be, giant piece of glass where it shouldn't be, okay, and two parallel walls is anything but that. Architecture, acoustics. Okay, Raphael has an image, we try and make it work. Same thing here in this pool. This is for a pretty well-known musician in Brazil, okay, and he wants this big giant skylight, okay, with these windows, wood and water, which is actually reflective. This is going to be an echo chamber, and that's unsatisfactory for him. The entire ceiling has got another layer of stretched plastic underneath it with little microperf holes. So this entire ceiling is the equivalent of foam by microperfing, okay? And so again, not limited. We're not limited by anything but our own imagination and our own ability to assimilate these two skills. Again, I hope you can see how exciting this is. Is this a radio station? Is this a classroom? Is this a recording studio? I don't know. I'll let you figure that out. Okay, somebody's office, living room, recording studio, media room. The lines are disappearing. Okay, the business lines are disappearing, the architectural lines are disappearing, and sky's the limit for having a lot of fun in these rooms. This is overlooking the water a little bit north of San Diego. We saw that room already. So when Adam from Owl City, which is a group you might have heard of, it's basically one guy, Adam Young, he wanted this is his house in the Midwest, and he made an extension on his log cabin, and he wanted his studio in the basement to feel like a log cabin. So this is our first log cabin studio. We tried our best, okay? I would have loved the logs to be vertical, because the diffusion would have been horizontal, but most log cabins, the logs are horizontal. But we got the spirit, familiar cloud, the walls, we just got the geometry to work. This is kind of cool. This guy's on rails, on wheels. So when he's recording, this goes all the way back. So basically, he records in one room. He plays everything. When you hear it, he plays every instrument. He's actually a bit of a genius. But then when he's mixing, this comes up forward. This is my favorite studio. It's an Airstream trailer plopped into the second floor of the Lower East Side Girls Club. This is a radio station where they teach 12-year-old girls how to be broadcasters. It's really, I mean, first of all, the Lower East Side Girls Club has been around for a long time. It's really cool. So they teach recording and broadcasting out of this Airstream, out of this converted Airstream. We took the wheels off it. All this is perforated metal because we wanted the inside to feel like an Airstream. So girls learn to do broadcasting and radio work right here. I just like this one because it just looks different. This studio only records and mixes a cappella music. It just mixes a cappella music, which you would think a bunch of people, a bunch of guys hanging around under an arch, you know, at Yale or Harvard, and you put a microphone and that's it. That is exactly how they don't mix it. I swear to God, every a cappella album, they mix one voice at a time. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. You think it should just be one microphone, but it's not how that world does. I always like the console. Vienna Symphony Library, this is one of the great companies that makes plugins for mixing. So this is their multi-speaker studio in Vienna. Very cool, state of the art. And it talks, and then we end, I figured we might as well end only a mile from where we are. We didn't design this room, obviously, but we did design their control room, which is now state of the art. For years, they just had possibly the worst control room ever. And finally, we got a shot at redoing it. So this won an award. And so everything at the BSO is recorded. Every concert is recorded, either for archival purposes. They got the contract to do every Shostakovich over the next few years. They're playing tonight at 8 o'clock. You'll listen. So this is their room. So we got to play around with lighting. By now you're starting to at least get a feel for geometry, materialization, lights, equipment, ergonomics, even building codes. The room had to have sprinklers because it's in the VSO, et cetera, et cetera. That's our last slide. So that was my lesson almost 50 years ago. I didn't know I was getting that lesson from Jimmy. I was way too young to even realize what was happening. But I don't think a week goes by that I don't think about what that experience taught me. I didn't get to spend too much time with him, but Eddie Kramer, who basically we designed the studio together, he's still a lifetime friend. I speak to him quite frequently. We were on a project together in Toronto. I consider myself pretty lucky to be doing this. I took two of my three favorite passions, baseball's the other. That didn't quite work out, the baseball thing, but I go to a lot of games and still play some softball. But I got to take my two favorite things, architecture and music. I couldn't ask for a more interesting field, and it's almost as if it's just each year another onion, another layer peels off. It's very exciting. I think most people, again, probably won't be doing too much work with recording studios. Maybe some of you will. But I think before it's all over, you'll be touching acoustics in one way or another. More and more spaces are being sensitized to it, either by clients demanding it or codes requiring it, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe some of that will rub off. So I think we were supposed to end at 2. We ended at 2:15. I don't think that's too bad. Thanks for listening. I'll just stay for a while. Okay. Stay in touch. I'm easy to get. If you have a question, you can just email me. I'm not that hard to find. And
I actually have a quick question.
oh, we got a question. Okay. Yes.
I noticed as you're walking us through this amazing array of projects, that many of your drawings are about plan and section. So there's a plan section relationship that you're
Well, those are the ones that I put on the screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was curious about.
And most of those are presentation type drawings.
Yes. Yes.
They're not, although I did show 1 or 2 details from
You did,
construction.
you
Yeah.
did. And I'm just wondering if there's a role for the reflected ceiling plan.
Oh, there's not a project we do that doesn't have an RCP. Okay, so that's a first. I've never been asked that.
So, we live in that world.
I keep track of, I keep mental track of my pay. I get paid for this? No, I don't think, oh, I was, okay. But usually my best pay is questions, is have I heard a question I've never heard? So that's a first. I've never heard anybody ask about RCPs. You'd have to be talking to architects to have anybody even know what an RCP is. But yeah, first, there's not a project we do that doesn't have sometimes 2 RCPs. Sometimes we have RCPs at 2 layers. Sometimes we have an RCP above the clouds and below the clouds. Okay, because they're too complicated. Or we'll have an RCP below the lid and above the lid because we have two bunches of things that are happening there, like ductwork or pipes. So absolutely RCPs, but for me to throw up an RCP here people would just have no idea what they're looking at, although this might have been the first class. So the answer is yes. To go even further, it is not uncommon for me. I still draw, I sketch. I don't really like computers. I mean, I can open it up. I'm actually not a power user. So I'm sketching all the time, usually holding color pencils. And it is not unusual for me to work in the ceiling first, which is why you see a lot of these projects have complex ceilings. It's not an accident. I love the ceilings, whereas a lot of architects don't even, oh yeah, ceiling, okay, I got to put something on the ceiling. So you end up with this. This is what you end up with if you don't think about the ceiling. Okay, it's 2x2 grid. Somebody said, let's put these little scallops here. They have no idea why. Just maybe it looks interesting, and then the rest is just tech. It's lights, it's sprinkler, it's speakers, and you have 9 trays all piled on top of each other. maybe looks like somebody thought a little bit about it, because at least they got everything on center line, so an architect probably took them, or maybe it was done in shop drawings, et cetera, et cetera. This is very different than what you've been looking at. You cannot get to this unless you are maybe starting with the ceiling. So I would say half of the design projects, we do a lot of projects where we're not the designers, like where we're just doing isolation. We start with the ceiling. Thematically, I may start with the ceiling. We just finished, we're in the middle of a studio now in Hawaii where we started, there's a tree there that's native, it's like a plant. So the concept was the plant would come up and go into two big stems with leaves on the ceiling. That was the starting image of the studio. And then from that we got to leaves, and from the leaves we got to panels and angles. So that's how we started. So yes, and yes to the question you didn't even ask. Absolutely. Yeah, every one of these I could put an RCP up. Yeah, absolutely. Just didn't. That's a first. Never had a question about that. Cool. Well, stay in touch. Good luck in your careers. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I do have a question, and I'm neither an architect nor an acoustical guy, but and maybe this is a stupid question. You can just tell me.
No such thing as a stupid question.
But it seemed to me that none of the stuff you were talking about involved what I think is called active noise cancellation.
Well, not 100% true. There was one studio you saw that did have some active bass absorbers. You're talking about active absorbers.
The same kind of technology that the Bose noise cancellation.
Yeah.
Is that done?
Yeah, it is done. There's two companies that have active bass absorbers. So what would that be? A speaker and a microphone. Microphone listens, sends stuff back out of phase. I mean, that's probably the simplest way to describe it. I would not start out with that as a solution. That's clearly something you do if you have no other way to do it. Well, first of all, they're expensive. Second of all, they need energy. Third of all, they're going to break. They could get tampered with, et cetera, et cetera. So when would we do it? Sometimes we would do it if we got called in, maybe after the fact, or we did it once in a room where we simply had no other solution. The room was too small. And two companies make them. One guy's what is it, not bag end, is it bag end, Kev, or they make it? E speaker, even bag end speakers, I think, makes it. And then the ones that we use, ASA, the PSI out of Switzerland, they make one. We got 4 of them in our demo room. They work. But this is
not a starting point.
No, for us it's an ending point. No. We would never start with that. I mean, no, I'd never start with that. That's like, okay, so how's your diet? Well, you start with penicillin. No, you don't start with penicillin, you end with penicillin. That's the last thing you take is penicillin. You start with a shake in the morning. I mean, yeah, no, that's an electronic Band-Aid if you're stuck, but are we afraid of it? No. Now, that's different than processing in speaker systems and in halls, and that we use all the time. That's different. But you're talking about using electronics to deal with, say, absorption. Yeah. We do it. There was one up there that had it. I just didn't get into it because it's a little bit too advanced for this. It's a little bit complicated. Yes?
I realize we focus, at least in here, more on recording spaces, but when it comes to just musical practice spaces, which, like here, there are a lot of.
We do a lot of,
and,
yeah.
like, right next to each other, right on top of each other, and for everything in Boston, it's mostly really old, so you can hear the thing next to you, or below you, or above you, or all of it at the same time.
They just didn't isolate the rooms, usually for money reasons.
I was going to ask that. Do you think in like the foreseeable future there's going to be a more cost-effective
There is.
way of-
There is, and there are prefabricated rooms that are cost-effective. If you were in a room like that, it's basically because somebody, well, it could have been a money issue, but my guess is it probably was more of an intellectual issue. It was just a mistake. You know, that's like getting in a car that's got crappy springs or it's bouncy and saying, are all cars like that? No, it's just got crappy springs and it's bouncy. Obviously, you can get a smooth car. Sometimes it's money. I mean, for instance, the Berkeley building, the studios are down below. That's all multi-layer construction, very intense. Then the ground floor is retail and the entrance and whatever. And then you go upstairs and there's the sort of double height cafeteria, you can kind of see it from the street. The fourth floor, which is on the plinth before the tower, those are all practice rooms. And they're all prefabricated. They're prefabricated booths that they bought. They're all isolated from each other and isolated from the floor. So it's actually not even hard. So if you've been practicing in that environment, they just didn't want to, they either didn't spend the money or didn't think about it or both. Not even that hard to do. All right, everybody, good luck in your careers. Thank you. Who did that poster person come in?
Yes, Sergio.
Oh, I want to meet, yeah, well, hey, okay, I want to meet him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, stay in touch.